12. Parliamentary System. The Constitution of India provides for a parliamentary form of government both at the centre and in the states. Article 74 and 75 deal with the parliamentary system at the centre and Article 163 and 164 in the states. Modern democratic governments are classified into parliamentary and presidential on the basis of nature of relations between the executive and the legislative organs of the government. The parliamentary system of government is the area in which the executive is responsible to the legislature for its policies and act. The presidential system of government, on the other hand, is one in which the executive is not responsible to the legislature for its policies and act and is constitutionally independent of the legislature in respect of its term of office. The parliamentary government is also known as cabinet government or responsible government or Westminster model of government and is prevalent in Britain, Japan, Canada, India, among others. The presidential government, on the other hand, is also known as non-responsible or non-parliamentary or fixed executive system of government and is prevalent in USA, Brazil, Russia, Sri Lanka, among others. Ivor Jennings called the parliamentary system as cabinet system because the cabinet is the nucleus of power in a parliamentary system. The parliamentary government is also known as responsible government as the cabinet, the real executive is accountable to the parliament and stays in office so long as it enjoys the latter's confidence. It is described as Westminster model of government after the location of the British Parliament where the parliamentary system originated. In the past, the British constitutional and political experts described the Prime Minister as primus inter pares, first among equals in relation to the cabinet. In the recent period, the Prime Minister's power, influence and position have increased significantly, that is, the cabinet. He has come to play a dominant role in the British politico-administrative system. Hence, the later political analytics like Crossman, Mackintosh and others have described the British system of government as prime ministerial government. The same description holds good in the Indian context too. Features of parliamentary government. The features or principles of parliamentary government in India are: Number 1. Nominal and real executives. The President is the nominal executive, de-zero executive or titular executive, while the Prime Minister is the real executive, de facto executive. Thus, the President is head of the state while the Prime Minister is head of the government. Article 74 provides for a Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President in the exercise of his functions. The advice so tendered is binding on the President. Number 2. Majority party rule. The political party which secures majority seats in the Lok Sabha forms the government. The leader of that party is appointed as the Prime Minister by the President. Other ministers are appointed by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. However, when no single party gets the majority, a coalition of parties may be invited by the President to form the government. Number 3. Collective responsibility. This is the bedrock principle of parliamentary government. The ministers are collectively responsible to the parliament in general and to the Lok Sabha in particular. Article 75. They act as a team and swim and sink together. The principle of collective responsibility implies that the Lok Sabha can remove the minister, example, Ministry, Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, from office by passing a vote of no confidence. Number 4. Political homogeneity. Usually members of the Council of Ministers belong to the same political party and hence they share the same political ideology. In case of coalition government, the ministers are bound by consensus. Number 5. Double membership. The ministers are members of both the legislature and the executive. This means that a person cannot be a minister without being a member of the parliament. The constitution stipulates that a minister who is not a member of the parliament for a period of 6 consecutive months ceases to be a minister. Number 6. Leadership of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister plays the leadership role in the system of government. He is the leader of Council of Ministers, leader of the Parliament and leader of the party in power. In these capacities, he plays a significant and highly crucial role in the functioning of the government. Number 7. Dissolution of the lower house. The lower house of the parliament, Lok Sabha, can be dissolved by the president on recommendation of the prime minister. In other words, the prime minister can advise the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha before the expiry of its term and hold fresh elections. This means that the executive enjoys the right to get the legislature dissolved in a parliamentary system. Number 8. Secrecy. The ministers operate on the principle of secrecy of procedure and cannot divulge information about their proceedings, policies, and decisions. They take the oath of secrecy before entering their office. The oath of secrecy to the ministers is administered by the president. Features of presidential government. Unlike the Indian Constitution, the American Constitution provides for the presidential form of government. The features of American presidential system of government are as follows. Number 1. The American president is both the head of the state and head of the government. As the head of the state, he occupies a ceremonial position. As the head of the government, he leads the executive organ of government. Number 2. The president is elected by an electoral college for a fixed tenure of 4 years. He cannot be removed by the Congress except by impeachment for a grave unconstitutional act. Number 3. The president governs with the help of a cabinet or a smaller body called kitchen cabinet. It is only an advisory body and consists of non-elected departmental secretaries. They are selected and appointed by him, are responsible only to him, and can be removed by him anytime. Number 4. The president and his secretaries are not responsible to the Congress for their act. They neither possess membership in the Congress nor attend its sessions. Number 5. The president cannot dissolve the House of Representatives, the lower house of the Congress. Number 6. The doctrine of separation of power is the basis of the American presidential system. The legislative, executive, and judicial powers of the government are separated and vested in 3 independent organs of the government. Merits of parliamentary system. The parliamentary system of government has the following merits. Number 1. Harmony between legislature and executive. The greatest advantage of the parliamentary system is that it ensures harmonious relationship and cooperation between the legislative and executive organs of the government. The executive is a part of the legislature and both are interdependent at work. As a result, there is less scope for disputes and conflicts between the two organs. Number 2. Responsible government. By its very nature, the parliamentary system establishes a responsible government. The ministers are responsible to the parliament for all their acts of omission and commission. The parliament exercises control over the ministers through various devices like question hour, discussions, adjournment motion, no confidence motion, etc. Number 3. Prevents despotism. Under this system, the executive authority is vested in a group of individuals, council of ministers, and not in a single person. This dispersal of authority checks the dictatorial tendencies of the executive. Moreover, the executive is responsible to the parliament and can be removed by a no confidence motion. Number 4. Ready alternative government. In case of the ruling party loses its majority, the head of the state can invite the opposition party to form the government. This means an alternative government can be formed without fresh elections. Hence, Dr. Jennings says the leader of the opposition is the alternative prime minister. Number 5. Wider representation. In a parliamentary system, the executive consists of a group of individuals, that is ministers, who are representatives of the people. Hence, it is possible to provide representation to all sections and regions in the government. The Prime Minister, while selecting his ministers, can take this factor into consideration. Demerits of the parliamentary system. In spite of above merits, the parliamentary system suffers from the following demerits. Number 1. Unstable government. The parliamentary system does not provide a stable government. There is no guarantee that a government can survive its tenure. The ministers depend on the mercy of the majority legislatures for their continuity and survival in office. A no confidence motion or political defection or evils of multi-party coalition can make the government unstable. The government headed by Morarji Desai, Charan Singh, VP Singh, Chandrasekhar, Devegowda and I.K. Gujral are some such examples. Number 2. No continuity of policies. The parliamentary system is not conducive for the formulation and implementation of long-term policies. This is due to the uncertainty of the tenure of the government. A change in the ruling party is usually followed by changes in the policies of the government. For example, the Janata government headed by Morarji Desai in 1977 reversed a large number of policies by the previous Congress government. The same was repeated by the Congress government after it came back to power in 1980. Number 3. Dictatorship of the cabinet. When the ruling party enjoys absolute majority in the parliament, the cabinet becomes autocratic and exercises nearly unlimited powers. H.J. Lasky says that the parliamentary system gives the executive an opportunity for tyranny. Ramsay Muir, the former British Prime Minister, also complained of the dictatorship of the cabinet. This phenomena was witnessed during the era of Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. Number 4. Against separation of powers. In the parliamentary system, the legislature and the executive are together and inseparable. The cabinet act as the leader of legislature as well as the executive. As Beghord points out, the cabinet is a hyphen and joins the buckle that binds the executive and legislative departments together. Hence, the whole system of government goes against the letter and spirit of the theory of separation of powers. In fact, there is a fusion of powers. Number 5. Government by amateurs. The parliamentary system is not conducive to administrative efficiency as the ministers are not experts in their fields. The Prime Minister had a limited choice in the selection of ministers. His choice is restricted to the members of parliament alone and does not extend to external talent. Moreover, the ministers devote most of their time to parliamentary work, cabinet meetings and party activities. Now, let us compare the parliamentary and presidential systems in terms of their feature, merits and demerits. This is understandable in the table given in the book. You can refer M.Laxmikant book chapter number 12. Reasons for adopting parliamentary system. A plea was made in favor of US presidential system of government in the Constituent Assembly, but the founding fathers preferred the British parliamentary system due to the following reasons. Parliamentary system have dual executive while presidential system has single executive. Number 2. Parliamentary system has majority party rule while presidential system has president and legislatures elected separately for a fixed term. Parliamentary system holds collective responsibility while presidential system does not hold any responsibility. Parliamentary system is politically homogeneous. Parliamentary system has political homogeneity while presidential system does not have political homogeneity, may be exist or may not be. Parliamentary system has double membership while presidential system has single membership. Parliamentary system leadership is under Prime Minister while in presidential system domination of President. Parliamentary system holds dissolution of lower house while in presidential system there is no dissolution of lower house. Fusion of power exists in parliamentary system while separation of power exists in presidential system. Merits of parliamentary system. Number 1. Harmony between legislature and executive, responsible government. Number 2. Number 3. Prevents despotism. Number 4. Wider representation. Demerits of parliamentary system. Number 1. Conflict between legislature and executive. Number 2. Non-responsible government. Number 3. May lead to autocracy. Number 4. Narrow representation. Demerits of presidential system. Number 1. Unstable government. Number 2. No continuity of policies. Merits of presidential system. Number 1. Stable government. Number 2. Definiteness in policies. Number 3. Based on separation of powers. And number 4. Government by experts. Number 1. Familiarity with the system. The constitution makers were somewhat familiar with the parliamentary system as it had been in operation in India during the British rule. K.M. Munshi argued that for the last 30 or 40 years, some kind of responsibility has been introduced in the governance of this country. Our constitutional traditions have become parliamentary after this experience. Why should we go back and buy a noble experience? Number 2. Preference to more responsibility. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar pointed out in the Constituent Assembly that a democratic executive system must satisfy two conditions, stability and responsibility. Unfortunately, it has not been possible so far to devise a system which can ensure both in equal degree. The American system gives more stability but less responsibility. The British system, on the other hand, gives more responsibility but less stability. The draft constitution is recommending the parliamentary system of executive has preferred more responsibility to more stability. Number 3. Need to avoid legislative executive conflict. The framers of the constitution wanted to avoid the conflict between the legislature and the executive, which are bound to occur in the presidential system prevalent in USA. They thought that an infant democracy could not afford to take the risk of a perpetual cleavage, feud, or conflict or threatened conflict between these two organs of the government. They wanted to form a government that would be conducive to the manifold development of the country. Number 4. Nature of Indian society. India is one of the most heterogeneous states and most complex plural societies in the world. Hence, the constitution makers adopted the parliamentary system as it offers greater scope for giving representation to various sections, interests and regions in the government. This promotes a national spirit among the people and builds a united India. Whether the parliamentary system should be continued or should be replaced by the presidential system has been a point of discussion and debate in our country once the 1970s. This matter was considered in detail by the Swaran Singh Committee appointed by the Congress government in 1975. The committee opined that the parliamentary system has been doing well and hence there is no need to replace it by the presidential system. Distinction between Indian and British models. The parliamentary system of Government of India is largely based on the British parliamentary system. However, it never became a replica of the British system and differs in the following respect. Number 1. India has a republican system in place of British monarchical system. In other words, the head of the state in India, that is president, is elected, while the head of the state in Britain, that is king or queen, enjoys a hereditary position. Number 2. The British system is based on the doctrine of the sovereignty of Parliament, while the Parliament is not supreme in India and enjoys limited and restricted powers due to a written constitution, federal system, judicial review, and fundamental rights. Number 3. In Britain, the Prime Minister should be a member of the lower house, House of Commons of the Parliament. In India, the Prime Minister may be a member of any of the two houses of Parliament. Number 4. Usually the members of parliament alone are appointed as ministers in Britain. In India, a person who is not a member of parliament can also be appointed as minister, but for a maximum period of 6 months. Number 5. Britain has a system of legal responsibility of the minister, while India has no such system. Unlike in Britain, the ministers in India are not required to countersign the official act of the head of the state. Number 6. Shadow cabinet is a unique institution of the British cabinet system. It is formed by the opposition party to balance the ruling cabinet and to prepare its members for future ministerial office. There is no such institution in India. Chapter 13. Federal System. Political scientists have classified governments into unitary and federal on the basis of the nature of relations between the national government and the regional governments. By definition, a unitary government is one in which all the powers are vested in the national government, and the regional governments, if at all exist, derive their authority from the national government. A federal government, on the other hand, is one in which powers are divided between the national government and the regional governments by the constitution itself, and both operate in their respective jurisdictions independently. Britain, France, Japan, China, Italy, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, Spain, and so on have the unitary model of government, while the US, Switzerland, Australia, Canada, Russia, Brazil, Argentina, and so on have the federal model of government. In a federal model, the national government is known as the federal government or the central government or the union government, and the regional government is known as the state government or the provincial government. The specific features of the federal and unitary governments are mentioned below in a comparative manner. The term federation is derived from a Latin word foedus, which means treaty or agreement. Thus, a federation is a new state political system which is formed through a treaty or an agreement political system between the various units. The units of a federation are known as various names like state as in US, or cantons as in Switzerland, or provinces as in Canada, or republics as in Russia. Comparing features of federal and unitary governments. Number 1. Federal governments have dual government, that is national government and regional government, while unitary government has single government, that is the national government, which may create regional governments. Number 2. Federal governments have written constitution. Unitary governments constitution may be written France or unwritten like in Britain. Number 3. Division of powers between the national and regional government has shown in federal government, while in unitary government no division of powers, all powers are vested in the national government itself. Number 4. Supremacy of constitution exists in federal government, while constitution may be supreme like in Japan or may not be supreme like in Britain. It is found in unitary government. Number 5. Federal government follows rigid constitution, while in unitary government constitution may be rigid like in France or may be flexible like in Britain. Number 6. Federal government have independent judiciary, while in unitary government judiciary may be independent or may not be independent. Number 7. Federal government follows bicameral legislature, while in unitary government legislature may be bicameral like in Britain or unicameral in China. A federation may be formed in two ways, that is, by way of integration or by way of disintegration. In the first case, a number of military, weak or economically backward state independent come together to form a big and strong union, as for example the US. In the second case, a big unitary state is converted into a federation by granting autonomy to the provisions to promote regional interest, for example Canada. The US is the first and the oldest federation in the world. It was formed in 1787 following the American Revolution 1775 to 83. It comprises 50 states, originally 13 states, and is taken as the model of federation. The Canadian Federation, comprising 10 provinces, originally 4 provinces, is also quite old, formed in 1867. The Constitution of India provides for a federal system of government in the country. The framers adopted the federal system due to two main reasons: the large size of the country and its socio-cultural diversity. They realized that the federal system not only ensures the efficient governance of the country, but also reconciles national unity with regional autonomy. However, the term federation has nowhere been used in the Constitution. Instead, Article 1 of the Constitution describes India as a union of a state. According to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the phrase union of a state has been preferred to federation of states to indicate two things. Number 1, the Indian Federation is not the result of an agreement among the states like the American Federation, and number 2, the states have no right to secede from the federation. The federation is union because it is indestructible. The Indian federal system is based on the Canadian model and not on the American model. The Canadian model differs fundamentally from the American model insofar as it establishes a very strong center. The Indian Federation resembles the Canadian Federation in its formation, that is by way of its disintegration. In its preference to the term union, the Canadian Federation is also called a union, and in its centralizing tendency, that is wasting more powers in the center in comparison to the states. Federal features of the Constitution. The federal features of the Constitution of India are explained below. Number 1. Dual polity. The Constitution establishes a dual polity consisting the union at the center and the states at the periphery. Each is endowed with sovereign powers to be exercised in the field assigned to them respectively by the Constitution. The union government deals with the matters of national importance like defense, foreign affairs, currency, communication, and so on. The state government, on the other hand, look after the matters of regional and local importance like public order, agriculture, health, local government, and so on. Number 2. Written Constitution. The Constitution is not only a written document but also the lengthiest constitution of the world. Originally, it contained a preamble, 395 articles divided into 22 parts and 8 schedules. At present, 2019, it consists of a preamble, about 470 articles divided into 25 parts and 12 schedules. It specifies the structure, organization, powers and functions of both the central and state governments and prescribes the limits within which they must operate. Thus, it avoids the misunderstandings and disagreements between the two. Number 3. Division of powers. The Constitution divided the powers between the center and the states in terms of the Union list, state list, and concurrent list in the 7th schedule. The Union list consists of 98 subjects, originally 97, the state list 59 subjects, originally 66, and the concurrent list 52 subjects, originally 47. Both the center and the state can make laws on the subjects of the concurrent list, but in case of a conflict, the central law prevails. The residuary subjects, that is, which are not mentioned in any of the 3 lists, are given to the center. Number 4. Supremacy of the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme or the highest law of the land. The laws enacted by the center and the states must conform to its provisions. Otherwise, they can be declared invalid by the Supreme Court or the High Court through their powers of judicial review. Thus, the organs of the government, legislative, executive, and judicial at both the levels must operate within the jurisdiction prescribed by the Constitution. Number 5. Rigid Constitution. The division of powers established by the Constitution as well as the supremacy of the Constitution can be maintained only if the method of its amendment is rigid. Hence, the Constitution is rigid to the extent that those provisions which are concerned with the federal structure, that is, center-state relations and the judicial organization, can be amended only by the joint action of the central and state governments. Such provisions require for their amendment a special majority of the parliament and also an approval of half of the state legislatures. Number 6. Independent Judiciary. The Constitution establishes an independent judiciary headed by the Supreme Court for two purposes. 1. To protect the supremacy of the Constitution by exercising the power of judicial review, and 2. To settle the dispute between the center and the state or between the states. The Constitution contains various measures like security of tenure to judges, fixed service conditions, and so on to make the judiciary independent of the government. Number 7. Bicameralism. The Constitution provides for a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, Rajya Sabha, and a lower house, Lok Sabha. The Rajya Sabha represents the states of Indian Federation, while the Lok Sabha represents the people of India as a whole. The Rajya Sabha, even though a less powered chamber, is required to maintain the federal equilibrium by protecting the interest of the state against the undue interference of the center. Unitary features of the Constitution. Besides the above federal features, the Indian Constitution also possesses the following or non-federal features. Number 1. A strong center. The division of power is in favor of the center and highly inequitable from the federal angle. Firstly, the union list contains more subjects than the state list. Secondly, the more important subjects have been included in the union list. Thirdly, the center has overriding authority over the concurrent list. Finally, the residuary powers have also been left with the center, while in the US they are vested in the states. Thus, the Constitution has made the center very strong. Number 2. States not indestructible. Unlike in other federations, the states in India have no right to territorial integrity. The parliament can be unilateral action, change the area, boundaries, or name of any state. Moreover, it requires only a simple majority and not a special majority. Hence, the Indian Federation is an indestructible union of destructible states. The American Federation, on the other hand, is described as an indestructible union of indestructible states. Number 3. Single constitution. Usually in a federation, the state have the right to frame their own constitution separate from that of the center. In India, on the other contrary, no such power is given to the states. The Constitution of India embodies not only the constitution of the center but also those of the states. Both the center and the state must operate within this single frame. The only exception in this regard was the case of Jammu and Kashmir, which had its own state constitution. Number 4. Flexibility of the Constitution. The process of constitutional amendment is less rigid than what is found in other federations. The bulk of the Constitution can be amended by the unilateral actions of the Parliament, either by simple majority or by special majority. Further, the power to initiate an amendment to the Constitution lies only with the center. In US, the state can also propose an amendment to the Constitution. Number 5. No equality of state representation. The states are given representation in the Rajya Sabha on the basis of population. Hence, the membership varies from 1 to 31. In US, on the other hand, the principle of equality of representation of states in the upper house is fully recognized. Thus, the American Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state. The principle is regarded as a safeguard for smaller states. Number 6. Emergency provisions. The Constitution stipulates 3 types of emergencies: national, state, and financial. During an emergency, the central government becomes all-powerful and the states go into the total control of the center. It converts the federal structure into a unitary one without a formal amendment of the Constitution. This kind of transformation is not found in any other federation. Number 7. Single citizenship. In spite of a dual polity, the Constitution of India, like that of Canada, adopted the system of single citizenship. There is only Indian citizenship and no separate state citizenship. All citizens, irrespective of the state in which they are born or reside, enjoys the same rights all over the country. The other federal states like US, Switzerland and Australia have dual citizenship, that is, national citizenship as well as state citizenship. Number 8. Integrated Judiciary. The Indian Constitution has established an integrated judicial system with the Supreme Court at the top and the state high courts below it. This single system of courts enforces both the central laws as well as the state laws. In US, on the other hand, there is a double system of courts whereby the federal laws are enforced by the federal judiciary and the state laws by the state judiciary. Number 9. All India services. In US, the federal government and the state governments have their separate public services. In India, also, the center and the states have their separate public services. But in addition, there are All India services, IAS, IPS and IFS, which are common to both the center and the states. The members of these services are recruited and trained by the center, which also possess ultimate control over them. Thus, these services violate the principle of federalism under the Constitution. Number 10. Integrated Audit Machinery. The Comptroller and Auditor General of India audits the account of not only the central government but also those of the state. But his appointment and removal is done by the President without consulting the states. Hence, this office restricts the financial autonomy of the states. The American Comptroller General, on the contrary, has no role with respect to the accounts of the state. Number 11. Parliament's authority over a state list. Even in the limited sphere of authority allotted to them, the states do not have exclusive control. The Parliament is empowered to legislate on any subject of the state list if Rajya Sabha passes a resolution to that effect in the national interest. This means that the legislative competence of the Parliament can be extended without amending the Constitution. Notably, this can be done when there is no emergency of any kind. Number 12. Appointment of Governor. The governor, who is the head of the state, is appointed by the president. He holds office during the pleasure of the president. He also acts as an agent of the center. Through him, the center exercises control over the state. The American Constitution, on contrary, provides for an elected head in the states. In this respect, India adopted the Canadian system. Number 13. Integrated Election Machinery. The Election Commission conducts elections not only to the central legislature but also to the state legislatures. But this body is constituted by the president and the state have no say in this matter. The position is same with regard to the removal of its members as well. On the other hand, US has separate machineries for the conduct of elections at the federal and state levels. Number 14. Veto over state bills. The governor is empowered to reserve certain types of bills passed by the state legislature for the consideration of the president. The president can withhold his assent to such bills not only in the first instance but also in the second instance. Thus, the president enjoys absolute veto and not suspensive veto over state bills. But in US and Australia, the states are autonomous within their fields and there is no provision for any such reservation. Critical evaluation of the federal system. From the above, it is clear that the Constitution of India has deviated from the traditional federal system like US, Switzerland and Australia and incorporated a large number of unitary or non-federal features, tilting the balance of power in favor of the center. This has prompted the constitutional experts to challenge the federal character of the Indian Constitution. Thus, K.C. Veere described the Constitution of India as quasi-federal. He remarked that Indian Union is a unitary state with subsidiary federal features rather than a federal state with subsidiary unitary features. According to K. Santhanam, the two factors have been responsible for increasing the unitary bias tendency of centralization of the Constitution. These are, number 1, the dominance of the center in the financial spheres and dependence of the state upon the central grants. Number 2, the emergence of powerful erstwhile planning commission which controlled the developmental process in the states. He observed India has practically functioned as a unitary state through the union and the states have tried to function formally and legally as a federation. However, there are other political scientists who do not agree with the above description. Thus, Paul Appleby characterizes the Indian system as extremely federal. Morris Jones termed it as a bargaining federalism. Ivor Jennings has described it as a federation with a strong centralizing tendency. He observed that the Indian Constitution is mainly federal with unique safeguards for enforcing national unity and growth. Alexander Wiggs stated that India is a case sui generis that is unique in character, Grainwell Austin called the Indian federalism as a cooperative federalism. He said that though the Constitution of India has created a strong central government, it has not made the state governments weak and has not reduced them to the level of administrative agencies for the execution of policies of the central government. He described the Indian Federation as a new kind of federation to meet India's peculiar needs. On the nature of Indian Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar made the following observations in the Constituent Assembly. The Constitution is a federal constitution in as much as it establishes a dual polity. The Union is not a league of states united in a loose relationship, nor are the states the agencies of the Union, deriving powers from it. Both the Union and the states are created by the Constitution. Both derive their respective authority from the Constitution. He further observed, yet the Constitution avoids the might mold or tight mold of federalism and could be both unitary as well as federal according to the requirements of time and circumstances. While replying to the criticism of over centralization in the Constitution, he stated, A serious complaint is made on the ground that there is too much centralization and the states have been reduced to municipalities. It is clear that this view is not an exaggeration but is also founded on a misunderstanding of what exactly the Constitution contrives to do. As to do the relations between the center and the state, it is necessary to bear in mind the fundamental principle on which it rests. The basic principle of federalism is that the legislative and executive authority is partition between the center and the state, not by any law to be made by the center, but by the Constitution itself. This is what the Constitution does. The states are in no way dependent upon the center for their legislative or executive authority. The states and the center are co-equal in this matter. It is difficult to see how much a constitution can be called centralism. It is therefore wrong to say that the state have been placed under the center. The center cannot by its own will alter the boundary of this partition, nor can the judiciary. In Bombay case 1994, the Supreme Court laid down that the Constitution is federal and characterized federalism as its the basic feature. It observed the fact that under the scheme of our Constitution, greater power is conferred upon the center, that is the state, does not mean that the state are mere appendages of the center. The states have an independent constitutional existence. They are not satellites or agents of the center. Within the sphere allotted to them, the states are supreme. The fact that during emergency and in certain other eventualities, their powers are overridden or invaded by the center is not destructive of the essential federal feature of the Constitution. They are exceptions and the exceptions are not a rule. Let it be said that the federalism in the Indian Constitution is not a matter of administrative convenience but one of the principal, the outcomes of our own process and recognition of the ground realities. In fact, the federalism in India represents a compromise between the following two conflicting considerations. Number one, normal division of power under which states enjoy autonomous within their own spheres. Number two, need for national integrity and a strong union government under exceptional circumstances. The following trends in the working of Indian political system reflects the federal spirit. Number one, territorial dispute between state, for example between Maharashtra and Karnataka over Belgaum. Number two, dispute between center over sharing of river water, for example between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu over Cauvery water. Number three, the emergence of regional parties and their coming to power in states like Andhra Pradesh or Tamil Nadu. Number four, the creation of new states to fulfill the regional aspirations, for example Mizoram or Jharkhand. Number five, demand of the state for more financial aid grants from the center to meet their developmental needs. Number six, assertion of autonomy by the states and their resistance to the interference from the center. Number 7. Supreme Court's imposition of several procedural limitations on the use of Article 356, President's rule in the state, by the center. Thank you so much. Chapter 14. Center-State Relations. The Constitution of India, being federal in structure, divides all powers, legislative, executive and financial, between the center and the states. However, there is no division of judicial power as the Constitution has established an integrated judicial system to enforce both the central laws as well as state laws. Though the center and the states are supreme in their respective fields, the maximum harmony and coordination between them is essential for the effective operation of the federal system. Hence, the Constitution contains elaborate provisions to regulate the various dimensions of the relations between the center and the states. The center state relations can be studied under three heads: legislative relations, administrative relations, and financial relations. Legislative relations. Article 245 to 255 in Part 11th of the Constitution deal with the legislative relations between the center and the states. Besides these, there are some other articles dealing with the same subject. Like any other federal constitution, the Indian Constitution also divides the legislative powers between the center and the states with respect to both the territory and the subjects of legislation. Further, the Constitution provides for the parliamentary legislation in the state field under five extraordinary situations, as well as the center's control over state legislation in certain cases. Thus, there are four aspects in the center state legislative relations, that is, territorial extent of central and state legislation, distribution of legislative subjects, parliamentary legislation in the state field, and center's control over state legislation. Number 1. Territorial extent of central and state legislation. The Constitution defines the territorial limits of the legislative powers vested in the center and the states in the following way. First, the Parliament can make laws for the whole or any part of the territory of India. The territory of India includes the states, the union territories, and the other area for the time being included in the territory of India. Second, a state legislature can make laws for the whole or any part of the state. The laws made by a state legislature are not applicable outside the state except when there is a sufficient nexus between the state and the object. Third, the Parliament alone can make extraterritorial legislation. Thus, the laws of the Parliament are also applicable to the Indian citizens and their property in any part of the world. However, the Constitution places certain restrictions on the plenary territorial jurisdiction of the Parliament. In the other words, the laws of Parliament are not applicable in the following areas. First, the President can make regulations for the peace, progress, and good government of the five union territories: the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu, and Ladakh. A regulation so made has the same force and effect as an Act of Parliament. It may also repeal or amend any Act of Parliament in relation to these union territories. Second, the Governor is empowered to direct that an Act of Parliament does not apply to a scheduled area in the state or apply with specified modifications and exceptions. Third, the Governor of Assam may likewise direct that an Act of Parliament does not apply to a tribal area, autonomous district in the state or apply with specified modifications and exceptions. The President enjoys the same power with respect to tribal areas, autonomous district in Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. Number 2. Distribution of legislative subjects. The Constitution provides for a threefold distribution of legislative subjects between the center and the states. That is, List 1, the Union List, List 2, the State List, and the List 3, it is Concurrent List, in the 7th Schedule. First, the Parliament has exclusive powers to make laws with respect to any of the matters enumerated in the Union List. This list has at present 98 subjects, originally 97 subjects like defense, banking, foreign affairs, currency, atomic energy, insurance, communication, interstate trade and commerce, census, audit, and so on. Number 2. The state legislature has in normal circumstances exclusive powers to make laws with respect to any of the matters enumerated in the state list. This has at present 59 subjects, originally 66 subjects like public order, police, public health and sanitation, agriculture, prisons, local government, fisheries, market, theatre, gambling and so on. Third, both the Parliament and the state legislature can make laws with respect to any of the matters enumerated in the concurrent list. This list has at present 52 subjects, originally 47 subjects like criminal law and procedure, civil procedure, marriage and divorce, population control and family planning, electricity, labor welfare, economic and social planning, drugs, newspapers, books, printing press, and others. The 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 transferred 5 subjects to concurrent list from state list, that is, education, forest, weight and measures, protection of wild animals and birds, administration of justice, constitution and organization of all courts except the Supreme Court and the High Court. Fourth, Parliament has power to make laws with respect to any matter for any part of the territory of India not included in a state, even though that matter is one which is enumerated in the state list. This provision has reference to the Union territories or the acquired territories. Fifth, the 101st Amendment Act of 2016 has made a special provision with respect to goods and services tax. Accordingly, the Parliament and the state legislature have power to make laws with respect to goods and services tax imposed by the Union or by the state. Further, the Parliament has exclusive power to make laws with respect to goods and services tax where the supply of goods or services or both takes place in the course of interstate trade or commerce. Sixth, the power to make laws with respect to residuary subjects, that is, the matters which are not enumerated in any of the 3 lists, is vested in the Parliament. This residuary power of legislation includes the power to levy residuary taxes. From the above scheme, it is clear that the matters of national importance and the matters which require uniformity of legislation nationwide are included in the Union list. The matters of regional and local importance and the matters which permit diversity of interest are specified in the state list. The matters on which uniformity of legislation throughout the country is desirable but not essential are enumerated in the concurrent list. Thus, it permits diversity along with uniformity. In US, only the powers of the federal government are enumerated in the constitution and the residuary powers are left to the states. The Australian constitution followed by the American pattern of single enumeration of powers. In Canada, on the other hand, there is a double enumeration, federal and provincial, and the residuary powers are vested in the center. The Government of India Act of 1935 provided for a threefold enumeration, that is, federal, provincial, and concurrent. The present constitution follows the scheme of this act but with one difference, that is, under this act, the residuary powers were given neither to the federal legislature nor to the provincial legislature but to the Governor General of India. In this respect, India follows the Canadian precedent. The Constitution expressly secures the predominance of the Union list over the state list and the concurrent list, and that of the concurrent list over the state list. Thus, in case of overlapping between the Union list and the state list, the former should prevail. In case of overlapping between the Union list and the concurrent list, it is again the former which should prevail. Where there is a conflict between the concurrent list and the state list, it is the former that should prevail. In case of a conflict between the central law and the state law on a subject enumerated in the concurrent list, the central law prevails over the state law. But there is an exception. If the state law has been reserved for the consideration of the President and has received his assent, then the state law prevails in that state. But it would still be competent for the Parliament to override such a law by subsequently making a law on the same matter. Number 3. Parliamentary legislation in the state field. The above scheme of distribution of legislative powers between the center and the state is to be maintained in normal times, but in abnormal times, the schemes of distribution is neither modified or suspended. In other words, the Constitution empowers the Parliament to make laws on any matter enumerated in the state list under the following 5 extraordinary circumstances. When Rajya Sabha passes a resolution, if the Rajya Sabha declares that it is necessary in the national interest that Parliament should make laws with respect to goods and services tax or a matter in the state list, then the Parliament becomes competent to make laws on that matter. Such a resolution must be supported by 2/3 of the members present and voting. The resolution remains in force for 1 year. It can be renewed any number of times, but not exceeding 1 year at a time. The law ceases to have effect on the expiration of 6 months after the resolution has ceased to be in force. This provision does not restrict the power of a state legislature to make laws on the same matter, but in case of inconsistency between a state law and a parliamentary law, the latter is to prevail. During a national emergency, the Parliament acquires the power to legislate with respect to goods and services tax or matters of the state list, while a proclamation of national emergency is in operation. The law becomes inoperative on the expiration of 6 months after the emergency has ceased to operate. Here also, the power of a state legislature to make laws on the same matter is not restricted, but in case of repugnancy between a state law and a parliamentary law, the latter is to prevail. When a state make a request, when the legislature of two or more states pass resolutions requesting the parliament to enact laws on a matter in the state list, then the parliament can make laws for regulating that matter. A law so enacted applies only to those states which have passed the resolution. However, any other state may adopt it afterwards by passing a resolution to that effect in its legislature. Such a law can be amended or repealed only by the parliament and not by the legislature of the concerned states. The effect of passing a resolution under the above provision is that the parliament becomes entitled to legislate with respect to a matter for which it has no power to make a law. On the other hand, the state legislature ceases to have the power to make a law with respect to that matter. The resolution operates as abdication or surrender of the power of the state legislature with respect to that matter, and it is placed entirely in the hands of parliament, which alone can then legislate with respect to it. Some examples of laws passed under the above provisions are Price Competition Act 1955, Wildlife Protection Act 1972, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, Urban Land Sealing and Regulation Act 1976, and Transplantation of Human Organ Act 1994. To implement international agreements, the Parliament can make laws on any matter in the state list for implementing the international treaties, agreements, or conventions. This provision enables the central government to fulfill its international obligations and commitments. Some examples of laws enacted under the above provisions are United Nations Privileges and Immunities Act 1947, Geneva Convention Act 1960, Anti-Hijacking Act 1982, and legislation relating to environment and TRIPS. During President's rule, when the President's rule is imposed in a state, the Parliament becomes empowered to make law with respect to any matter in the state list in relation to that state. A law made so by the Parliament continues to be operative even after the President's rule. This means that the period for which such a law remains in force is not coterminous with the duration of the President's rule, but such a law can be repealed or altered or reenacted by the state legislature. Number 4. Center's control over state legislation. Besides the Parliament's power to legislate directly on the state subjects under the exceptional situations, the Constitution empowers the centre to exercise control over the state's legislative matters in the following ways. Number 1. The governor can reserve certain types of bills passed by the state legislature for the consideration of the president. The president enjoys absolute veto over them. Number 2. Bills on certain matters enumerated in the state list can be introduced in the state legislature only with the previous sanction of the president. For example, the bills imposing restrictions on the freedom of trade and commerce. Number 3. The centre can direct to the states to reserve money bills and other financial bills passed by the state legislature for the president's consideration during a financial emergency. From the above, it is clear that the Constitution has assigned a position of superiority to the centre in the legislative sphere. In this context, the Sarkaria Commission on Centre-State Relations 1983-88 observed the rule of federal supremacy is a technique to avoid absurdity, resolve conflict, and ensure harmony between the union and state laws. If this principle of union supremacy is excluded, it is not difficult to imagine its deleterious results. There will be every possibility of our two-tier political system being stultified by interference, strife, legal chaos, and confusion caused by a host of conflicting laws, much to be bewilderment of the common citizen. Integrated legislative policy and uniformity on basic issues of common union state concern will be stymied. The federal principle of unity in diversity will be very much a casualty. This rule of federal supremacy, therefore, is indispensable for the successful functioning of the federal system. Administrative relations. Article 256 to 263 in Part 11th of the Constitution deal with the administrative relations between the center and the states. In addition, there are various other articles pertaining to the same matter. Distribution of executive powers. The executive power has been divided between the center and the states on the lines of the distribution of legislative powers, except in few cases. Thus, the executive power of the center extends to the whole of India. To the matters on which the Parliament has exclusive powers of legislation, that is, the subjects enumerated in the Union list, to the exercises of rights, authority, and jurisdiction conferred on it by any treaty or agreement. Similarly, the executive power of a state extends to its territory in respect of matters on which the state legislature has exclusive power of legislation, that is, the subjects enumerated in the state list, in respect of matters on which both the Parliament and the state legislatures have power of legislation, that is, the subjects enumerated in the concurrent list. The executive power rests with the state except when a constitutional provision or a parliamentary law specifically confers it on the center. Therefore, a law on a concurrent subjects, though enacted by the Parliament, is to be executed by the state except when the Constitution or the Parliament has directed otherwise. Obligation of states and the center. The Constitution has placed two restrictions on the executive power of the state in order to give ample scope to the center for exercising its executive power in an unrestricted manner. Thus, the executive power of every state is to be exercised in such a way as to ensure compliance with the laws made by the Parliament and any existing law which apply in the state, and as not to impede or prejudice the exercise of executive power of the center in the state, while the former lays down a general obligation upon the state. The latter imposes a specific obligation on the state not to hamper the executive power of the center. Articles related to center-state legislative relations at a glance. Article number 245. Extent of laws made by Parliament and by the legislature of states. Article number 246. Subjects matter of laws made by Parliament and by the legislature of states. Article number 246A. A special provision with respect to goods and services tax. Article number 247. Power of Parliament to provide for the establishment of certain additional codes. Article number 248. Residuary powers of legislation. Article number 249. Power of Parliament to legislate with respect to a matter in the state list in the national interest. Article number 250. Power of Parliament to legislate with respect to any matter in the state list if a proclamation of emergency is in operation. Article number 251. Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament under Article 249 and 250 and laws made by the legislature of states. Article number 252. Power of Parliament to legislate for two or more states by consent and adoption of such legislation by any other state. Article number 253. Legislation for giving effect to international agreements. Article number 254. Inconsistency between laws made by Parliament and laws made by the legislature of states. Article number 255. Requirement as to recommendations and previous sanction to be regarded as matter of procedure only. In both the cases, the executive power of the center extends to giving of such directions to the state as are necessary for the purpose. The sanction behind these directions of the center is coercive in nature. Thus, Article 365 says that where any state has failed to comply with or to give effect to any directions given by the center, it will be lawful for the President to hold that a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provision of the Constitution. It means that in such a situation, the President's rule can be imposed in the state under Article 356. Center's directions to the state. In addition to the above two cases, the center is empowered to give directions to the states with regard to the exercise of their executive power in the following matters. First, the construction and maintenance of means of communication declared to be of national or military importance by the state. Second, the measures to be taken for the protection of railways within the state. Third, the provision of adequate facilities for instruction in the mother tongue at the primary stage of education to children belonging to linguistic minority groups in the state. Fourth, the drawing up and execution of the specified schemes for the welfare of the scheduled tribes in the state. The coercive sanction behind the central directions under Article 365 is also applicable in these cases. Mutual delegation of functions. The distribution of legislative powers between the center and the state is rigid. Consequently, the center cannot delegate its legislative powers to the states, and a single state cannot request the parliament to make a law on a state subject. The distribution of executive power in general follows the distribution of legislative powers, but such a rigid division in the executive sphere may lead to occasional conflict between the two. Hence, the Constitution provides for intergovernment delegation of executive function in order to mitigate rigidity and avoid a situation of deadlock. Accordingly, the President may, with the consent of the state government, entrust to that government any of the executive functions of the center. Conversely, the governor of a state may, with the consent of the central government, entrust to that government any of the executive functions of the state. This mutual delegation of administrative functions may be conditional or unconditional. The Constitution also makes a provision for the entrustment of the executive functions of the center to a state without the consent of that state. But in this case, the delegation is by the Parliament and not by the President. Thus, a law made by the Parliament on a subject of the Union list can confer powers and impose duties on a state, or authorize the conferring of powers and imposition of duties by the centre upon a state, irrespective of the consent of the state concerned. Notably, the same thing cannot be done by the state legislature. From the above, it is clear that the mutual delegation of functions between the center and the state can take place either under an agreement or by a legislation. While the center can use both the methods, a state can use only the first method. Cooperation between the center and states. The Constitution contains the following provisions to secure cooperation and coordination between the center and the state. First, the Parliament can provide for the adjudication of any dispute or complaint with respect to use, distribution, and control of waters of any interstate river and river valley. Second, the President can establish, under Article 263, an Interstate Council to investigate and discuss subject of common interest between the centre and the states. Such a council was set up in 1990. Third, full faith and credit is to be given throughout the territory of India to public act, records and judicial proceedings of the centre and every state. Fourth, the Parliament can appoint an appropriate authority to carry out the purpose of the constitutional provisions relating to the interstate freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse, but no such authority has been appointed so far. All India services. Like in any other federation, the centre and the state also have their separate public services called as the central services and the state services respectively. In addition, there are All India services, IAS, IPS and IFS. The members of these services occupy top positions or key posts under both the centre and the state and serve them by turns, but they are recruited and trained by the centre. These services are controlled jointly by the centre and the state. The ultimate control lies with the central government while the immediate control rests with the state government. In 1947, Indian Civil Service was replaced by IAS and the Indian Police was replaced by IPS and were recognized by the Constitution as All India Services. In 1966, the Indian Forest Service was created as the third All India Service. Article 312 of the Constitution authorizes the Parliament to create new All India Services on the basis of Rajya Sabha resolution to that effect. each of these three All India services, irrespective of their division among different states, from a single service with common rights and status and uniform scales of pay throughout the country. Though the All India services violate the principle of federalism under the Constitution by restricting the autonomy and patronage of the state, they are supported on the ground that they help in maintaining high standards of administration in the center as well as in the state. They help to ensure uniformity of the administrative system throughout the country. They facilitate liaison, cooperation, coordination, and joint action on the issues of common interest between the center and the state. While justifying the institution of All India services in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar observed that the dual polity, which is inherent in a federal system, is followed in all federations by a dual service. In all federations, there is a federal civil service and the state civil service. The Indian Federation, though a dual polity, will have a dual service, but with one exception. It is recognized that in every country there are certain posts in its administrative setup which might be called strategic from the point of view of maintaining the standard of administration. There can be no doubt that the standard of administration depends upon the caliber of the civil servants who are appointed to the strategic post. The Constitution provides that without depriving the states of their right to form their own civil services, there shall be an All India service recruited on an All India basis with common qualifications, with uniform scale of pay, and members of which alone could be appointed to those strategic posts throughout the Union. Public Service Commissions. In the field of public service commissions, the center-state relations are as follows. First, the chairman and member of the State Public Service Commission, though appointed by the governor of the state, can be removed only by the president. Second, the parliament can establish a joint state public service commission for two or more states on the request of the state legislatures concerned. The chairman and member of the JSPSC are appointed by the president. Third, the Union Public Service Commission can serve the needs of a state on the request of that state governor and with approval of the president. Fourth, the UPSC assists the state when requested by two or more states in framing and operating schemes of joint recruitment for any service for which candidate possessing special qualifications are required. Integrated Judicial System. Though India has a dual polity, there is no dual system of administration of justice. The Constitution, on the other hand, established an integrated judicial system with the Supreme Court at the top and the State High Court below it. This single system of courts enforces both the central laws as well as the state laws. This is done to eliminate diversities in the remedial procedure. The judge of a state high court are appointed by the president in consultation with the Chief Justice of India and the governor of the state. They can also be transferred and removed by the president. The parliament can establish a common high court for two or more states. For example, Maharashtra and Goa or Punjab and Haryana have a common high court. Relations during emergencies. First, during the operation of a national emergency under Article 352, the center becomes entitled to give executive directions to a state or any matter. Thus, the state governments are brought under the complete control of the center, though they are not suspended. Second, when the president's rule is imposed in a state under Article 356, the president can assume to himself the function of the state government and powers vested in the governor or any other executive authority in the state. Third, during the operation of a financial emergency under Article 360, the center can direct the state to observe canons of financial propriety and can give other necessary directions, including the reduction of salaries of persons serving in the state. Other provisions. The Constitution contains the following other provisions which enable the center to exercise control over the state administration. Article 355 imposes two duties on the center: to protect every state against external aggression and internal disturbance, and to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. The governor of a state is appointed by the president. He holds office during the pleasure of the president. In addition to the constitutional head of the state, the governor acts as an agent of the center in the state. He submits periodical reports to the center about the administrative affairs of the state. The state election commissioner, though appointed by the governor of the state, can be removed only by the president. Extra constitutional devices. In addition to the above mentioned constitutional devices, there are extra constitutional devices to promote cooperation and coordination between the center and the state. These include a number of advisory bodies and conferences held at the central level. The non-constitutional advisory bodies include the Niti Aayog, which succeeded the Planning Commission, the National Integration Council, the Central Council of Health and Family Welfare, the Central Council of Local Government and Zonal Councils, the Northeastern Council, the Central Council of Indian Medicines, the Central Council of Homeopathy, the Transport Development Council, the University Grants Commission, and so on. The important conferences that held either annually or otherwise to facilitate center-state consultation on a wider range of matter are as follows. The Governor Conference presided over by the President, the Chief Minister Conference presided over by the Prime Minister, the Chief Secretaries Conference presided over by the Cabinet Secretary, the Conference of Inspector General of Police, the Chief Justice Conference presided over by the Chief Justice of India, the Conferences of Vice Chancellors, the Home Minister Conference presided over by the Central Home Minister, the Law Minister Conference presided over by the Central Law Minister. Financial Relations. Article 268 to 293 in Part 12 of the Constitution deal with center-state finance relations. Besides these, there are other provisions dealing with the same subject. These together can be studied under the following heads. Allocation of taxing powers. The Constitution divides the taxing powers between the centre and the state in the following way. The Parliament has exclusive power to levy taxes on subjects enumerated in the Union list, which are 13 in number. The state legislature has exclusive power to levy taxes on subjects enumerated in the state list, which are 18 in number. There are no tax entries in the concurrent list. In other words, the concurrent jurisdiction is not available with respect to tax legislation. But the 101st Amendment Act of 2016 has made an exception by making a special provision with respect to goods and services tax. This amendment has conferred concurrent power upon Parliament and state legislatures to make laws governing goods and services tax. The residuary power of taxation, that is, the power to impose taxes not enumerated in any of the three lists, is vested in the Parliament. Under this provision, the Parliament has imposed gift tax, wealth tax, and expenditure tax. The Constitution also draws a distinction between the power to levy and collect a tax and the power to appropriate the proceeds of the tax so levied and collected. For example, the income tax is levied and collected by the centre, but its proceeds are distributed between the centre and the state. Further, the Constitution has placed the following restrictions on the taxing powers of the state. Number 1. A state legislature can impose taxes on professions, trades, callings and employments, but the total amount of such taxes payable by any person should not exceed Rs 2500 per annum. Number 2. A state legislature is prohibited from imposing a tax on the supply of goods and services or both in the following two cases: where such supply takes place outside the state, where such supply takes place in the course of import or export. Further, the Parliament is empowered to formulate the principles for determining when a supply of goods or services or both takes place outside the state or in the course of import or export. Number 3. A state legislature can impose tax on the consumption or sale of electricity, but no tax can be imposed on the consumption or sale of electricity which is consumed by the centre or sold to the centre, consumed in the construction, maintenance or operation of any railway by the centre or by the concerned railway company, or sold to the centre or the railway company for the same purpose. Number 4. A state legislature can impose a tax in respect of any water or electricity stored, generated, consumed, distributed, or sold by any authority established by Parliament for regulating or developing any interstate river or river valley, but such a law, to be effective, should be reserved for the President's consideration and receive his assent. Distribution of tax revenues. The 80th Amendment Act of 2000 and the 101st Amendment Act of 2016 have introduced major changes in the scheme of the distribution of tax revenues between the center and the state. The 80th Amendment was enacted to give effect to the recommendation of the 10th Finance Commission. The Commission recommended that out of the total income obtained from certain central taxes and duties, 29% should go to the state. This is this is known as the alternative scheme of devolution and came into effect retrospectively from April 1, 1996. This amendment has brought several central taxes and duties like corporation tax and customer duties at par with income tax, taxes on income other than agricultural income as far as their constitutionality mandated sharing with the state is concerned. The 101st Amendment has paved the way for the introduction of a new tax regime, that is, goods and services tax, in the country. Accordingly, the amendment conferred concurrent taxing powers upon the Parliament and the state legislatures to make laws for levying GST on every transaction of supply of goods or services or both. The GST replaced a number of indirect taxes levied by the union and the state governments and is intended to remove cascading effect of the taxes and provide for a common national market for goods and services. The amendment provided for subsuming of various central indirect taxes and levies such as central excise duty, additional excise duties, excise duty levied under the Medicinal and Toilet Preparations Excise Duties Act 1955, service tax, additional customs duty commonly known as countervailing duty, special additional duty of customs, central surcharges and cesses so far as they related to the supply of goods and services. Similarly, the amendment provided for subsuming of estate value added tax, sales tax, entertainment tax other than the tax levied by the local bodies, central sales tax levied by the center and collected by the state, octroi and entry tax, purchase tax, luxury tax, tax on lottery, betting and gambling, estate surcharges and cesses in so far as they related to the supply of goods and services. Further, the amendment deleted Article 268AA as well as Entry 92C in the Union list. Both were dealing with service tax. They were added earlier by the 88th Amendment Act of 2003. The service tax was levied by the center but collected and appropriated by both the center and the state. After the above two amendments, that is 80th Amendment and 101st Amendment, the present position with respect to the distribution of tax revenues between the center and state is as follows. Tax levied by the center but collected by and appropriated by the state under Article 268. This category includes the stamp duties on bills of exchange, checks, promissory notes, policies of insurance, transfer of shares and others. The proceeds of these duties levied within any state do not form a part of the Consolidated Fund of India but are assigned to that state. Taxes levied and collected by the center but assigned to the state under Article 269. The following taxes fall under this category. Taxes on the sale or purchase of goods other than newspapers in the course of interstate trade or commerce, taxes on the consignment of goods in the course of interstate trade or commerce. The net proceeds of these taxes do not form a part of the Consolidated Fund of India. They are assigned to the concerned states in accordance with the principles laid down by the Parliament. Levy and collection of goods and services tax in course of interstate trade or commerce under Article 269A. The goods and services tax on supplies in the course of interstate trade or commerce are levied and collected by the center, but this tax is divided between the center and the state in the manner provided by Parliament on the recommendations of the GST Council. Further, the Parliament is also authorized to formulate the principles for determining the place of supply and when a supply of goods or services or both takes place in the course of interstate trade or commerce. Taxes levied and collected by the center but distributed between the center and the state under Article 270. This category includes all taxes and duties referred to in the Union list except the following. Number 1. Duties and taxes referred to in Article 268, 269 and 269A. Number 2. Surcharge on taxes and duties referred to in Article 271. Number 3. Any cess levied for specific purposes. The manner of distribution of the net proceeds of these taxes and duties is prescribed by the President on the recommendation of the Finance Commission. Surcharge on certain taxes and duties for purpose of centre. Article 271. The Parliament can at any time levy the surcharges on taxes and duties referred to in Article 269 and 270. The proceeds of such surcharges go to the centre exclusively. In other words, the state have no share in these surcharges. However, the goods and services tax is exempted from this surcharge. In other words, this surcharge cannot be imposed on the GST. Taxes levied and collected and retained by the state. These are the taxes belonging to the state exclusively. They are enumerated in the state list and are 18 in number. These are: first, land revenue; second, taxes on agricultural income; third, duties in respect of succession to agricultural land; fourth, estate duty in respect of agricultural land; fifth, taxes on lands and buildings; sixth, taxes on mineral rights; seventh, duties of excise on alcoholic liquors for human consumption, opium, Indian hemp, and other narcotic drugs and containing alcohol or narcotics; seventh, eighth, taxes on the consumption or sale of electricity; ninth, taxes on the sale of petroleum, crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, commonly known as petrol, natural gas, aviation, turbine fuel, and alcoholic liquor for human consumption, but not including sale in the course of interstate trade or commerce, or sale in the course of international trade or commerce of such goods. Number 10. Taxes on goods and passengers carried by road or inland waterways. 11th. Taxes on vehicles. 12th. Taxes on animals and boats. 13. Tolls. 14. Taxes on professionals, trades, callings and employments. 15. Capitation taxes. 16. Taxes on entertainment and amusements to the extent levied and collected by a panchayat or a municipality or a regional council or a district council. 17. Stamp duty on document except those specified in the union list. And last one, 18. Fees on the matters enumerated in the state list except court fees. Distribution of non-tax revenue. The center. The receipt from the following form the major source of non-tax revenue by the center. Number 1, post and telegraphs. Number 2, railways. Number 3, banking. Number 4, broadcasting. Number 5, coinage and currency. Number 6, central public sector enterprises. Number 7, escheat and lapse and others. The state. The receipt from the following form the major sources of non-tax revenue of the state. Number 1, irrigation. Number 2, forest. Number 3, fisheries. Number 4, state public sector enterprises. Number 5, escheat and lapses and others. Grants in aid to the state. Besides sharing of taxes between the center and the state, the Constitution provides for grants in aid to the state from the central resources. There are two types of grants in aid, that is statutory grants and discretionary grants. Statutory grants. Article 275 empowers the Parliament to make grants to the state which are in need of financial assistance and not to every state. Also, different sums may be fixed for different state. These sums are charged on the Consolidated Fund of India every year. Apart from this general provision, the Constitution also provides for specific grants for promoting the welfare of the scheduled tribes in a state or for raising the level of administration of the scheduled areas in the state, including the state of Assam. The statutory grants under Article 275, both general and specific, are given to the state on the recommendation of the Finance Commission. Discretionary grants. Article 282 empowers both the center and the states to make any grants for any public purpose, even if it is not within their respective legislative competence. Under this provision, the center make grants to the state. These grants are also known as discretionary grants, the reason being that the center is under no obligation to give these grants and the matter lies within its discretion. These grants have a twofold purpose: to help the state financially to fulfill planned targets and to give some leverage to the center to influence and coordinate state action to effectuate the national plan. Other grants. The Constitution also provided for a third type of grants in aid, but for a temporary period. Thus, a provision was made for grants in aid of export duties on the jute and jute products to the state of Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal. These grants were to be given for a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution. These sums were charged on the Consolidated Fund of India and were made to the states on the recommendation of the Finance Commission. Goods and Services Tax Council. The smooth and efficient administration of the goods and services tax requires a cooperation and coordination between the center and the state. In order to facilitate this consultation process, the 101st Amendment Act of 2016 provided for the establishment of a Goods and Services Tax Council, or the GST Council. Article 279A empowered the President to constitute a GST Council by an order. The Council is a joint forum of the Centre and the State. It is required to make recommendations to the Centre and the States on the following matters. A. The taxes, cesses, and surcharges levied by the Centre, the States, and the local bodies that would get merged in GST. B. The goods and services tax that may be subjected to GST or exempted from GST. C. Model GST laws, principles of levy, apportionment of GST levied on supplies in the course of interstate trade or commerce, and the principles that govern the place of supply. D. The threshold limit of turnover below which goods and services may be exempted from GST. E. The rates include floor rates with bands of GST. F. Any special rate or rates for a specified period to raise additional resources during any natural calamity or disaster. Finance Commission. Article 280 provides for a Finance Commission as a quasi-judicial body. It is constituted by the President every 5th year or even earlier. It is required to make recommendations to the President on the following matters: the distribution of net proceeds of taxes to be shared between the Centre and the State, and the allocation between the State the respective shares of such proceeds, the principles which should govern the grants in aid to the State by the Centre, that is out of the Consolidated Fund of India, the measure needed to augment the Consolidated Fund of a state to supplement the resources of the panchayat and the municipalities in the state on the basis of the recommendation made by the State Finance Commission. Any other matter referred to it by the President in the interest of sound finance. Till 1960, the Commission also suggested the amounts paid to the state of Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal in lieu of assignment of any share of the net proceeds in each year by export duty on jute and jute products. The Constitution envisages the Finance Commission as the balancing wheel of fiscal federalism in India. Protection of the state interest. To protect the interest of a state in the financial matters, the Constitution lays down that the following wills can be introduced in the Parliament only on the recommendation of the President. A bill which imposes or varies any tax or duty in which states are interested. A bill which varies the meaning of the expression agricultural income as defined for the purpose of the enactment relating to Indian income tax. A bill which affects the principles on which monies are or may be distributable to state. A bill which imposes any surcharge or any specified tax or duty for the purpose of the centre. The expression tax or duty in which states are interested means a tax or duty, the whole or part of the net proceeds whereof are assigned to any state. A tax or duty by reference to the net proceeds whereof sums are for the long time being payable out of the Consolidated Fund of India to any state. The phrase net proceeds means the proceeds of a tax or a duty minus the cost of collection. The net proceeds of a tax or a duty in any area is to be ascertained and certified by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. His certificate is final. Borrowing by the centre and the state. The Constitution makes the following provisions with regards to the borrowing power of the centre and the state. Number 1. The central government can borrow either within India or outside upon the security of the Consolidated Fund of India, or can give guarantee, but both within the limit fixed by the Parliament. So far, no such law has been enacted by the Parliament. Number 2. Similarly, a state government can borrow within India and not abroad upon the security of the Consolidated Fund of the state, or can give guarantees, but both within the limits fixed by the legislature of that state. Number 3. The central government can make loans to any state or give guarantees in respect of loans raised by any state. Any sums required for the purpose of making such loans are to be charged on the Consolidated Fund of India. Number 4. A state cannot raise any loan without the consent of the centre. If there is still outstanding any part of a loan made to the state by the centre, or in respect of which a guarantee has been given by the centre. Intergovernmental tax immunities. Like any other federal constitution, the Indian constitution also contains the rule of immunity from mutual taxation and makes the following provisions in this regard. Exemption of central property from state taxation. The property of centre is exempted from all taxes imposed by a state or any authority within a state like municipalities, district boards, panchayats and so on. But the parliament is empowered to remove this ban. The word property includes land, building, chattels, shares, debt, everything that has a money value, and every kind of property, movable or immovable, and tangible or intangible. Further, the property may be used for sovereign like armed forces or commercial purposes. The corporations on the companies created by the central government are not immune from state taxation or local taxation. The reason is that a corporation or a company is a separate legal entity. Exemption of state property or income from central taxation. The property and income of a state is exempted from central taxation. Such income may be derived from sovereign functions or commercial functions, but the centre can tax the commercial operations of a state if Parliament so provides. However, the Parliament can declare any particular trade or business as incidental to the ordinary functions of the government, and it would then not be taxable. Notably, the property and income of local authorities situated within a state are not exempted from the central taxation. Similarly, the property or income of corporations and companies owned by a state can be taxed by the state centre. The Supreme Court, in an advisory opinion 1963, held that the immunity granted to a state in respect of central taxation does not extend to the duties of customs or duties of excise. In other words, the centre can impose custom duties on goods imported or exported by a state, or an excise duty on goods produced or manufactured by a state. Effects of emergencies. The centre-state financial relations in normal times undergo changes during emergencies. These are follows. National emergency. While the proclamation of national emergency under Article 352 is in operation, the President can modify the constitutional distribution of revenues between the centre and the state. This means that the President can either reduce or cancel the transfer of finances, both tax sharing and grants and aid, from the centre to the state. Such modification continues till the end of the financial year in which the emergency ceases to operate. Financial emergency. While the proclamation of financial emergency under Article 360 is in operation, the centre can give directions to the state to observe the specified canons of financial propriety, to reduce the salaries and allowances of all classes of persons serving in the state, and to reserve all money bills and other financial bills for the consideration of the President. Trends in centre-state relations. Till 1967, the centre-state relations by and large were smooth due to one-party rule at the centre and in most of the state. In 1967 elections, the Congress party was defeated in the 9 states and its position at the centre became weak. This changed political scenario heralded a new era in the centre-state relations. The non-Congress governments in the state opposed the increasing centralization and intervention of the central government. They raised the issue of state autonomy and demanded more powers and financial resources to the state. This casual tensions and conflict in centre-state relations. Tension areas in center-state relations. The issues which created tensions and conflict between the center and the states are: number 1, mode of appointment and dismissal of governor; 2, discretionary and partisan role of governors; 3, imposition of president's rule and partisan interest; 4, deployment of central forces in the states to maintain law and order; 5, reservation of state bills for the consideration of the president; 6, discrimination in financial allocations to the state; 7, role of planning commission in approving state object projects; 8, management of all India services, IAS, IPS and IFS; 9, use of electronic media for political purposes; 10, appointment of inquiry commission against the chief minister; 11, sharing of finances between center and the state; 12, encroachment by the center on the state list. The issues in which center-state relations have been under consideration since the mid-1960s in this direction, the following developments have taken place. Administrative Reform Commission. The central government appointed a 6-member Administrative Reforms Commission in 1966 under the chairmanship of Morarji Desai, followed by K. Hanumanthaiah. Its term of references included, among others, the examination of center-state relations in order to examine thoroughly the various issues in center-state relations. The ARC constituted a study team under M.C. Sattelward. On the basis of the report of this study team, the ARC finalized its own report and submitted it to the central government in 1969. It made 22 recommendations for improving the center-state relations. The important recommendations are: establishment of an interstate council under Article 263 of the Constitution, appointment of persons having long experience in public life and administration and non-partisan attitude as governors, delegation of powers to the maximum extent to the state, transferring of more financial resources to the states to reduce their dependency upon the center, deployment of central armed forces in the states either on their request or otherwise. No action was taken by the central government on the recommendations of the ARC. Rajmannar Committee. In 1969, the Tamil Nadu government appointed a 3-member committee under the chairmanship of Dr. P.V. Rajmannar to examine the entire question of center-state relations and to suggest amendments to the constitution so as to secure utmost autonomy to the state. The committee submitted its report to the Tamil Nadu government in 1971. The committee identified the reasons for the prevailing unitary trends, tendencies of centralization in the country. They include certain provisions in the constitution which confer special powers on the center, one-party rule both at the center and in the state, inadequacy of state finance, fiscal resources and consequent dependence on the center for financial assistance, the institution of central planning and the role of the planning commission. The important recommendations of the committee are as follows: an interstate council should be set up immediately, finance commission should be made a permanent body, planning commission should be disbanded and its place should be taken by a statutory body. Article 356, 357 and 365 dealing with President's rule should be totally omitted. The provision that the state ministry holds office during the pleasure of the governor should be omitted. Certain subjects of the union list and the concurrent list should be transferred to the state list. The residuary powers should be allocated to the state. All India services, IAS, IPS and IFS should be abolished. The central government completely ignored the recommendation of the Rajmannar Committee. Anandpur Sahib Resolution. In 1973, the Akali Dal adopted a resolution containing both political and religious demands in a meeting held at Anandpur Sahib in Punjab. The resolution, generally known as Anandpur Sahib Resolution, demanded that the centre's jurisdiction should be restricted only to defence, foreign affairs, communication and currency, and the entire residuary powers should be vested in the state. It stated that the constitution should be made federal in the real sense and should ensure equal authority and representation to all the states at the centre. West Bengal Memorandum. In 1977, the West Bengal government, led by the Communists, published a memorandum on center-state relations and sent to the central government. The memorandum inter alia suggested the following: the word union in the constitution should be replaced by the word federal. The jurisdiction of the center should be confined to defense, foreign affairs, currency, communications, and economic coordination. All other subjects, including the residuary should be vested in the state. Article 356 and 357, President's Rule, and 360, Financial Emergency, should be repealed. State consent should be made obligatory for formation of new states or reorganization of existing state. Of the total revenues raised by the central from all sources, 75% should be allocated to the state. Rajya Sabha should have equal powers with that of Lok Sabha. There should be only central and state services, and the All India services should be abolished. The central government did not accept the demands made in the memorandum. Sarkaria Commission. In 1983, the central government appointed a three-member commission on center-state relations under the chairmanship of R.S. Sarkaria, a retired judge of the Supreme Court. The commission was asked to examine and review the working of existing arrangements between the center and states in all spheres and recommended appropriate changes and measures. It was initially given 1 year to complete its work, but its term was extended 4 times. It submitted its report in 1988. The Commission did not favor a structural change and regarded the existing constitutional arrangements and principles relating to the institutions basically sound, but it emphasized on the need for changes in the functional or operational aspect. It observed that federalism is more a functional arrangement for cooperative action than a static institutional concept. It outrightly rejected the demand for curtailing the powers of the center and state, that a strong center is essential to safeguard the national unity and integrity, which is being threatened by the falciparous tendencies in the body politic. However, it did not equate a strong center with centralization of powers. It observed that over-centralization leads to blood pressure at the center and anemia at the periphery. The Commission made 247 recommendations to improve center-state relations. The important recommendations are mentioned below. Number 1. A permanent interstate council called the Intergovernmental Council should be set up under Article 263. Number 2. Article 356, President's Rule, should be used very sparingly in extreme cases as a last resort when all the available alternatives fail. Number 3. The institution of All India services should be further strengthened and some more such services should be created. Number 4. The residuary powers of taxation should continue to remain with the Parliament, while the other residuary powers should be placed in the concurrent list. Number 5. When the President withholds his assent to the state bills, the reasons should be communicated to the state government. Number 6. The National Development Council should be renamed and reconstituted as the National Economic and Development Council. Number 7. The Zonal Council should be constituted afresh and reactivated to promote the spirit of federalism. Number 8. The centre should have powers to deploy its armed forces even without the consent of a state. However, it is desirable that the state should be consulted. Number 9. The centre should consult the state before making a law on a subject of the concurrent list. Number 10. The procedure of consulting the Chief Minister in the appointment of the State Governor should be prescribed in the Constitution itself. Number 11. The net proceeds of the corporation tax may be made permissibly shareable with the state. Number 12. The Governor cannot dismiss the Council of Ministers so long as it commands a majority in the Assembly. Number 13. The Governor's term of 5 years in a state should not be disturbed except for some extremely compelling reasons. Number 14. No commission of inquiry should be set up against a state minister unless a demand is made up by the Parliament. Number 15. The surcharge on income tax should not be levied by the centre except for a specific purpose and for a strictly limited period. Number 16. The present division of functions between the Finance Commission and the Planning Commission is reasonable and should continue. Number 17. A step should be taken to uniformly implement the 3-language formula in its true spirit. Number 18. No autonomy for radio and television but decentralization in their operations. Number 19. No change in the role of Rajya Sabha and centre's power to reorganize the state. Number 20. The Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities should be activated. The central government has implemented 180 out of 247 recommendations of the Sarkaria Commission. The most important is the establishment of the Interstate Council in 1990. Panchi Commission. The second commission on center-state relations was set up by the Government of India in April 2007 under the chairmanship of Madan Mohan Panchi, former Chief Justice of India. It was required to look into the issue of center-state relations, keeping in view the sea changes that have taken place in the polity and economy of India since the Sarkaria Commission had last looked at the issue of center-state relations over 2 decades ago. The terms of reference of the Commission were as follows. The terms of reference of the Commission were as follows. Number 1. The Commission was required to examine and review the working of the existing arrangements between the Union and States as per the Constitution of India, the healthy precedents being followed, various pronouncements of the courts in regard to powers, functions, and responsibilities in all spheres, including legislative relations, administrative relations, role of governors, emergency provisions, financial relations, economic and social planning, Panchayati Raj institutions, sharing of resources, including interstate river water, and recommended such changes or other measures as may be appropriate, keeping in view the practical difficulties. Number 2. In examining and reviewing the working of the existing arrangements between the Union and States and making recommendations as to changes and measures needed, the Commission was required to keep in view the social and economic developments that have taken place over the years, particularly over the last 2 decades, and have due regard to the scheme and framework of the Constitution. Such recommendations were also needed to address the growing challenges of ensuring good governance for promoting the welfare of the people, whilst strengthening the unity and integrity of the country, and of availing emerging opportunities for sustained and rapid economic growth for alleviating poverty and illiteracy in the early decades of the new millennium. Number 3. While examining and making its recommendations on the above, the Commission was required to have particular regard but not limit its mandate to the following. A. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre, that is state, during measured and prolonged outbreaks of communal violence, caste violence, or any other social conflict leading to prolonged and escalated violence. B. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre, state, in the planning and implementation of the mega projects like the interlinking of rivers that would normally take 15 to 20 years for completion and hinge vitally on the support of the state. C. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre and state in promoting effective devolution of powers and autonomy to Panchayati Raj institutions and local bodies, including the autonomous bodies under the 6th schedule of the Constitution within a specified period of time. D. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre and state in promoting the concept and practice of independent planning and budgeting at the district level. E. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre, state in linking central assistance of various kinds with the performance of the state. F. The role, responsibility, and jurisdiction of the centre in adopting approaches and policies based on positive discrimination in favour of backward states. G. The impact of recommendations made by the 8th to 12th Finance Commission on the fiscal relation between the centre and the state, especially the greater dependence of the state on devolution of funds from the centre. H. The need and relevance of separate taxes on the production and on the sales of goods and services subsequent to the introduction of value-added tax regime. I. The need for freeing interstate trade in order to establish a unified and integrated domestic market, as also in the context of the reluctance of state governments to adopt the relevant Sarkaria Commission's recommendation in next chapter. J. The need for settling up of a central law enforcement agency empowered to take up suo motu investigation of crimes having interstate or international ramifications with serious implications on national security. The feasibility of a supporting legislation under Article 355 for the purpose of suo motu deployment of central forces in the state if and when the situation so demands. The Commission submitted its report to the government in April 2010. In finalizing the 1456-page report in 7 volumes, the Commission took extensive help from the Sarkaria Commission report, the National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution report, and the Second Administrative Reform Commission report. However, in a number of areas, the Commission report differed from the Sarkaria Commission recommendations. After examining at length the issues raised in its terms of reference and the related aspect in all their hues and shades, the Commission came to the conclusion that cooperative federalism will be the key for sustaining India's unity, integrity, and social and economic development in future. The principles of cooperative federalism thus may have to act as a practical guide for Indian polity and governance. In all, the Commission made over 310 recommendations touching upon several significant areas in the working of center-state relations. The important recommendations are mentioned below. Number 1. To facilitate effective implementation of the laws on list 3rd subjects, it is necessary that some broad agreement is reached between the Union and state before introducing legislation in Parliament on matters in the concurrent list. Number 2. The Union should be extremely restrained in asserting parliamentary supremacy in matters assigned to the state, greater flexibility to state in relation to subjects in the state list and transferred items in the concurrent list is the key for better center-state relations. Number 3. The Union should occupy only that many of subjects in concurrent or overlapping jurisdiction which are absolutely necessary to achieve uniformity of policy in demonstrable national interest. Number 4. There should be a continuing auditing role for the Interstate Council in the management of matters in concurrent or overlapping jurisdiction. Number 5. The period of 6 months prescribed in Article 201 for the state legislature to act when the bill is returned by the President can be made applicable for the President also to decide on assenting or withholding assent to a state bill reserved for consideration of the President. The number 6. Parliament should make a law on the subject of entry 14 of List 1 treaty making and implementing it through parliamentary legislation to streamline the procedures involved. The exercise of the power obviously cannot be absolute or unchartered in view of the federal structure of legislative and executive powers. Number 7. Financial obligations and its implications on state finances arising out of treaties and agreements should be a permanent term of reference to the Finance Commission constituted from time to time. Number 8. While selecting governors, the central government should adopt the following strict guidelines as recommended in the Sarkaria Commission report and follow its mandate in letter and spirit. Number 1. He should be eminent in some walk of life. Number 2. He should be a person from outside the state. Number 3. He should be a detached figure and not too intimately connected with the local politics of the state. Number 4. He should be a person who has not taken to grant up politics generally and particularly in the recent past. Number 9. Governors should be given a fixed tenure of 5 years and their removal should not be at the sweet will of the government at the center. Number 10. The procedure laid down for impeachment of President mutandis can be made applicable for impeachment of governors as well. Number 11. Article 163 does not give the governor a general discretionary power to act against or without the advice of his Council of Ministers. In fact, the area for the exercise of discretion is limited, and even in this limited area, his choice of action should not be arbitrary or fanciful. It must be a choice dictated by reason, activated by good faith, and tempered by caution. Number 12. In respect of bills passed by the Legislative Assembly of a state, the governor should take the decisions within 6 months whether to grant assent or to reserve it for consideration of the President. Number 13. On the question of governor's role in appointment of Chief Minister in the case of an hung assembly, it is necessary to lay down certain clear guidelines to be followed as constitutional conventions. These guidelines may be as follows. First, the party or combination of parties which commands the support in the Legislative Assembly should be called upon to the government. Second, if there is a pre-poll alliance or coalition, it should be treated as one political party, and if such coalition obtains a majority, the leader of such coalition shall be called by the governor to the government. Third, in case no party or pre-poll coalition has a clear majority, governor should select the chief minister in the order of preference indicated here. A. The group of parties which had pre-poll alliance commanding the largest number. B. The largest single party stalking a claim to form the government with the support of others. C. A post-electoral coalition with all partners joining the government. D. A post-electoral alliance with some parties joining the government and the remaining including independents supporting to government from outside. 14. On the other question of dismissal of a chief minister, the governor should invariably insist on the chief minister proving his majority on the floor of the house, for which he should prescribe a time limit. Number 15. The governor should have the right to sanction for prosecution of a state minister against the advice of the Council of Ministers if the cabinet decision appears to the governor to be motivated by bias in the face of overwhelming material. Number 16. The Convention of Governors acting as chancellors of universities and holding other statutory positions should be done away with. His role should be confined to the constitutional provisions only. Number 17. When an external aggression or internal disturbance paralyzes the state administration, creating a situation of a potential breakdown of the constitutional machinery of the state, all alternative courses available to the Union for discharging its paramount responsibility under Article 355 should be exhausted to contain the situation, and exercise of powers under Article 356 should be limited strictly to rectifying a failure of the constitutional machinery in the state. Number 18. On the question of invoking Article 356 in case of failure of constitutional machinery in states, suitable amendments are required to incorporate the guidelines set forth in the landmark judgment of the Supreme Court in S.R. Bommai versus Union of India 1994. This would remove possible misgivings in this regard on the part of a state and help in smoothing center-state relations. Number 19. Given the strict parameters now set for invoking the emergency provisions under Article 352 and 356 to be used only as a measure of last resort, and the duty of the Union to protect state under Article 355, it is necessary to provide a constitutional or legal framework to deal with situations which require central intervention but do not warrant invoking the extreme steps under Article 352 and 356. Providing the framework for localized emergency would ensure that the state government can continue to function and the assembly would not have to be dissolved, while providing a mechanism to let the central government respond to the issue specifically and locally. The imposition of local emergency is fully justified under the mandate of Article 355, read with Entry 2A of List 1 and Entry 1 of List 2 of the 7th Schedule. Number 20. Suitable amendments to Article 263 are required to make the Interstate Council a credible, powerful and fair mechanism for management of interstate and center-state differences. Number 21. The Zonal Council should meet at least twice a year with an agenda proposed by state concerned to maximize coordination and promote harmonization of policies and action having interstate ramification. The Secretariat of a strengthened Interstate Council can function as the Secretariat of the Zonal Council as well. Number 22. The Empowered Committee of Finance Minister of a state proved to be a successful experiment in interstate coordination on fiscal matters. There is need to institutionalize similar models in other sectors as well. A forum of chief minister chaired by one of the chief minister by rotation can be similarly thought about, particularly to coordinate policies to sectors like energy, food, education, environment and health. 23. New All India services in sectors like health, education, engineering and judiciary should be created. 24. Factors inhibited the composition and functioning of the second chamber as a representative forum of states should be removed or modified, even if it requires amendment of the constitutional provisions. In fact, Rajya Sabha offers immense potential to negotiate acceptable solutions to the friction points which emerged between centre and states in fiscal, legislative and administrative relations. Number 25. A balance of power between state inter se is desirable, and this is possibly by equality of representation in the Rajya Sabha. This requires amendments of the relevant provisions to give equality of seats to states in the Rajya Sabha irrespective of their population size. Number 26. The scope of devolution of powers to local bodies to act as institution of self-government should be constitutionally defined, though appropriate amendments. 27. All future central legislations involving state involvement should provide for cost sharing, as in the case of RTE Act. Existing central legislations where the state are entrusted with the responsibility of implementation should be suitably amended or provided for sharing of cost by the central government. Number 28. The royalty rates on major minerals should be revised at least every 3 years without any delays. States should be properly compensated for any delay in the revision of royalty beyond 3 years. Number 29. The current ceiling on profession tax should be completely done away with a constitutional amendment. Number 30. The scope for raising more revenue from the taxes mentioned in Article 268 should be examined afresh. This issue may be either referred to the next Finance Commission or an expert committee be appointed to look into the matter. Number 31. To bring greater accountability, all fiscal legislations should provide for an annual assessment by an independent body, and the report of these bodies should be laid in both Houses of Parliament, state legislature. Number 32. Consideration specified in the terms of reference of the Finance Commission should be even-handed, as between the centre and the state, there should be an effective mechanism to involve the state in the finalization of the tour of the Finance Commission. 33. The central government should review all the existing SASs and surcharges with a view to bringing down their share in the gross tax revenue. Number 34. Because of the close linkages between the plan and non-plan expenditure, an expert committee may be appointed to look into the issue of distinction between the plan and non-plan expenditure. Number 35. There should be much better coordination between the Finance Commission and the Planning Commission. The synchronization of the periods covered by the Finance Commission and the 5-year plan will considerably improve such coordination. Number 36. The Finance Commission division in the Ministry of Finance should be converted into a full-fledged department serving as the permanent secretariat for the Finance Commission. Number 37. The Planning Commission has a crucial role in the current situation, but its role should be that of coordination rather than the micromanaging sectoral plans of the central ministries and the state. 38. Steps should be taken for the setting up of an Interstate Trade and Commerce Commission under Article 307, read with entry 42 of List 1. This commission should be vested with both advisory and executive roles with decisions making powers. As a constitutional body, the decisions of the Constitution Commission should be final and binding on all states as well as the Union of India. Any party aggrieved with the decision of the Commission may prefer an appeal to the Supreme Court. The report of the Commission was circulated to all stakeholders, including state government, UT, administrations, and union ministries, department concerned, for their considered views on the recommendations of the Commission. The comments received from the union ministries and departments of the state government, UT administrations, are under the consideration of the Interstate Council. Chapter 15. Interstate Relations. The successful functioning of the Indian federal system depends not only on the harmonious relations and close cooperation between the centre and the states, but also between the status inter se. Hence, the Constitution makes the following provisions with regard to interstate comity. Number 1. Adjudication of interstate water disputes. Number 2. Coordination through interstate councils. Number 3. Mutual recognition of public act, records, and judicial proceedings. Number 4. Freedom of interstate trade, commerce, and intercourse. In addition, the zonal councils have been established by the Parliament to promote interstate cooperation and coordination. Interstate water disputes. Article 262 of the Constitution provides for the adjudication of interstate water disputes. It makes two provisions. First, Parliament may by law provide for the adjudication of any dispute or complaint with respect to the use, distribution, and control of waters of any interstate river and river valley. Number 2. Parliament may also provide that neither the Supreme Court nor any other court is to exercise jurisdiction in respect of any such dispute or complaint. Under this provision, the Parliament has enacted two laws, the River Boards Act 1956 and the Interstate Water Dispute Act 1956. The River Boards Act provides for the establishment of river boards for the regulation and development of interstate river and river valleys. A river board is established by the central government on the request of the state government concerned to advise them. The Interstate Water Dispute Act empowers the central government to set up an ad hoc tribunal for the adjudication of a dispute between two or more states in relation to the waters of an interstate river or river valley. The decision of the tribunal would be final and binding on the parties to the dispute. Neither the Supreme Court nor any other court is to have jurisdiction in respect of any water dispute which may be referred to such a tribunal under this Act. The need for an extrajudicial machinery to settle interstate water dispute is as follows. The Supreme Court would indeed have jurisdiction to decide any dispute between states in connection with water supplies if legal rights or interests are concerned, but the experience of most countries has shown that rules of law based upon the analogy of private proprietary interest in water do not afford a satisfactory basis for settling disputes between the states where the interest of the public at large in the proper use of water supplies are involved. So far, 2019, the central government has set up 9 interstate water dispute tribunals. The name of the tribunals, the years in which they were constituted, and the state involved in the dispute are mentioned below. Number 1. Krishna Water Dispute Tribunal first. It was set up in 1969 and states involved Maharashtra, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Number 2. Godavari Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 1969 and the states involved Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha. Number 3. Narmada Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 1969. The states involved are Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra. Number 4. Rabi and Bias Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 1986. The states involved are Punjab, Haryana and Rajasthan. Number 5. Cauvery Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 1990. The states involved Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. Number 6. Krishna Water Dispute Tribunal 2. It was set up in 2004. The states involved are Maharashtra, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Number 7. Vanshadra Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 2010. States involved are Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. Number 8. Mahadai Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 2010. States involved are Goa, Karnataka and Maharashtra. Number 9. Mahanadi Water Dispute Tribunal. It was set up in 2018. States involved are Odisha and Chhattisgarh. Interstate Councils. Article 263 contemplates the establishment of an interstate council to effect coordination between the states and between centre and states. Thus, the President can establish such a council if at any time it appears to him that the public interest would be served by its establishment. He can define the nature of duties to be performed by such a council and its organization and procedure. Even though the President is empowered to define the duties of an interstate council, Article 263 specifies the duties that can be assigned to it in the following manner. A. Inquiring into and advising upon disputes which may arise between states. B. investigating and discussing subjects in which the states or the center and the states have a common interest. C. Making recommendations upon any such subject and particularly for the better coordination of policy and action on it. The Council's function to inquire and advise upon interstate dispute is complementary to the Supreme Court's jurisdiction under Article 131 to decide a legal controversy between the governments. The Council can deal with any controversy, whether legal or non-legal, but its function is advisory unlike that of the court, which gives a binding decision. Under the above provision of Article 263, the President has established the following councils to make recommendations for the better coordination of policy and action in the related subjects. Central Council of Health and Family Welfare, Central Council of Local Government, 4 regional councils for sales tax for the northern, eastern, western and southern zones. Establishment of Interstate Council. The Sarkaria Commission on the Center-State Relations 1983-88 made a strong case for the establishment of a permanent interstate council under Article 263 of the Constitution. It recommended that in order to differentiate the Interstate Council from other bodies established under the same Article 263, it must be called as the Intergovernmental Council. The Commission recommended that the Council should be charged with the duties laid down in Clause B and C of Article 263. In pursuance of the above recommendation of the Sarkaria Commission, the Janata Dal government, headed by VP Singh, established the Interstate Council in 1990. It consists of the following members: Prime Minister as the chairman, Chief Minister of all the states, Chief Minister of Union Territories having legislative assemblies, administrators of union territories not having legislative assemblies, governors of a state under President's rule, 6 central cabinet ministers including the Home Minister to be nominated by the Prime Minister. 5 ministers of cabinet rank, Minister of a state, independent charge, nominated by the chairman of the council, that is, Prime Minister, are permanent invitees to the council. The council is a recommendatory body on issues relating to interstate, center-state and center-union territories relations. It aims at promoting coordination between them by examining, discussing and deliberating on such issues. Its duties in detail are as follows: investigating and discussing such subjects in which the states or the center have a common interest, making recommendations upon any such subject for the better coordination of policy and action on it, deliberating upon such other matters of general interest to the states as may be referred to it by the chairman. The council may meet at least thrice in a year. Its meetings are held in cameras and all questions are decided by consensus. There is also a standing committee of the council. It was set up in 1996 for continuous consultation and processing of matters for the consideration of the council. It consists of the following members: Union Home Minister as the chairman, 5 Union Cabinet Ministers, 9 Chief Ministers. The council is assisted by a secretariat called the Interstate Council Secretariat. This secretariat was set up in 1991 and is headed by a secretary to the Government of India. Since 2011, it is also functioning as the secretariat of the Zonal Council. Public Act, Record and Judicial Proceedings. Under the Constitution, the jurisdiction of each state is confined to its own territory. Hence, it is possible that the act and records of one state may not be recognized in another state. To remove any such difficulty, the Constitution contains the full faith and credit clause, which lays down the following. First, full faith and credit is to be given throughout the territory of India to public act, record and judicial proceedings of the centre and every state. The expression public act includes both legislative and executive act of the government. The expression public record include any official book, register or record made by a public servant in the discharge of his official duties. Number 2. The manner in which and the conditions under which such act, record and proceedings are to be proved and their effect determined would be as provided by the laws of Parliament. This means that the general rule mentioned above is subject to the power of Parliament to lay down the mode of proof as well as the effect of such act, records and proceedings of one state in another state. Number 3. Final judgments and orders of civil courts in any part of India are capable of execution anywhere within India without the necessity of a fresh suit upon the judgment. The rule applies only to civil judgments and not to criminal judgments. In other words, it does not require the courts of a state to enforce the penal laws of another state. Interstate trade and commerce. Article 301 to 307 in Part 13 of the Constitution deal with the trade, commerce, and intercourse within the territory of India. Article 301 declares that trade, commerce, and intercourse throughout the territory of India shall be free. The object of this provision is to break down the border barriers between the state and to create one unit with a view to encourage the free flow of trade, commerce, and intercourse in the country. The freedom under this provision is not confined to interstate trade, commerce, and intercourse, but also extends to intra-state trade, commerce, and intercourse. Thus, Article 301 will be violated whether restrictions are imposed at the frontier of any state or at any prior or subsequent stage. The freedom guaranteed by Article 301 is a freedom from all restrictions except those which are provided for in the other provisions. Article 302 to 305 of Part 12 of the Constitution itself. These are explained below. Number 1. Parliament can impose restrictions on the freedom of text, commerce, trade, commerce, and intercourse between the state or within a state in public interest. But the Parliament cannot give preference to one state over another or discriminate between the state except in the case of scarcity of goods in any part of India. Number 2. The legislature of a state can impose reasonable restrictions on the freedom of trade, commerce, and intercourse with that state or within that state in public interest, but a bill for this purpose can be introduced in the legislature only with the previous sanction of the President. Further, the state legislature cannot give preference to one state over another or discriminate between the state. Number 3. The legislature of a state can impose on goods imported from other states or the union territories any tax to which similarly goods manufactured in that state are subject. This provision prohibits the imposition of discriminatory taxes by the state. Number 4. The freedom under Article 301 is subject to the nationalization laws, that is, laws providing for monopolies in favor of the center or the state. Thus, the Parliament or the state legislature can make laws for the carrying on by the respective government any trade, business, industry, or service, whether to the exclusion, complete or partial, of citizens or otherwise. The Parliament can appoint an appropriate authority for carrying out the purpose of the above provisions relating to the freedom of trade, commerce, and intercourse and restrictions on it. The Parliament can also confer on that authority the necessary powers and duties, but no such authority has been appointed so far. Zonal Councils. The zonal councils are the statutory and not the constitutional bodies. They are established by an Act of Parliament, that is, State Reorganization Act of 1956. The Act divided the country into 5 zones: Northern, Central, Eastern, Western, and Southern, and provided a zonal council for each zone. While forming these zones, several factors have been taken into account, which include the natural division of the country, the river system and means of communication, the cultural and linguistic affinity, and the requirement of economic development, security, law and order. Each zonal council consists of the following members: Home Minister of Central Government, Chief Minister of all the states in the zone, 2 other ministers for each state in the zone, Administrator of each union territory in the zone. Besides, the following persons can be associated with the zonal council as advisors, that is, without the right to vote in the meetings: a person nominated by the Planning Commission, Chief Secretary of the Government of each state in the zone, Development Commissioner of each state in the zone. The Home Minister of Central Government is the common chairman of the 5 zonal councils. Each Chief Minister acts as a Vice Chairman of the Council by rotation, holding office for a period of 1 year at a time. The zonal councils aim at promoting cooperation and coordination between states, union territories, and the center. They discuss and make recommendations regarding matters like economic and social planning, linguistic minorities, border dispute, interstate transport, and so on. They are only deliberative and advisory bodies. The objective or the functions of the zonal council in detail are as follows: to achieve an emotional integration of the country, to help in arresting the growth of acute state consciousness, regionalism, linguism, and particularistic trends, to help in removing the after effects of separation in some cases so that the process of reorganization, integration, and economic advancement may synchronize, to enable the center and state to cooperate with each other in social and economic matters and exchange ideas and experience in order to evolve uniform policies, to cooperate with each other in the successful and speedy execution of major development projects, to secure some kind of political equilibrium between different regions of the country. Northeastern Council. In addition to the above zonal councils, a Northeastern Council was created by a separate Act of Parliament, the Northeastern Council Act of 1971. Its members include Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Sikkim. Its functions are similar to those of the zonal councils, but with few additions. It has to formulate a unified and coordinated regional plan covering matters of common importance. It has to review from time to time the measure taken by the member state for the maintenance of security and public order in the region. Zonal councils at a glance. Number 1. Northern Zonal Council. Members are Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, Rajasthan, Delhi, Chandigarh, Jammu and Kashmir, and Ladakh. Headquarters is in New Delhi. Number 2. Central Zonal Council. Members are Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, and Madhya Pradesh. Headquarters is in Allahabad. Number 3. Eastern Zonal Council. Members are Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal, and Odisha. Headquarters is in Kolkata. Number 4. Western Zonal Council. Gujarat. Members are Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, and Daman and Diu. Headquarters is in Mumbai. Number 5. Southern Zonal Council. Members are Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Puducherry. Headquarters is in Chennai. Chapter 16. Emergency Provisions. The emergency provisions are contained in Part 18 of the Constitution from Article 352 to 360. These provisions enable the central government to meet any abnormal situation effectively. The rationality behind the incorporation of these provisions in the Constitution is to safeguard the sovereignty, unity, integrity, and security of the country, the democratic political system, and the Constitution. During an emergency, the central government becomes all powerful and the states go into the total control of the center. It converts the federal structure into a unitary one without a formal amendment of the constitution. This kind of transformation of political system from federal during normal times to unitary during emergency is a unique feature of the Indian Constitution. In this context, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar observed in the Constituent Assembly that all federal systems, including American, are placed in a tight mold of federalism. No matter what the circumstances, it cannot change its form and shape. It can never be unitary. On the other hand, the Constitution of India can be both unitary as well as federal according to the requirements of time, circumstances. In normal times, it is framed to work as a federal system, but in times of emergency, it is so designed as to make it work as though it was a unitary system. The Constitution stipulates three types of emergencies. Number 1. An emergency due to war, external aggression, or armed rebellion, Article 352. This is popularly known as national emergency. However, the Constitution employs the expression proclamation of emergency to denote an emergency of this type. Number 2. An emergency due to the failure of the constitutional machinery in the state, Article 356. This is popularly known as President's Rule. It is also known by two other names, state emergency or constitutional emergency. However, the Constitution does not use the word emergency for this situation. Number 3. Financial emergency due to a threat to the financial stability or credit of India under Article 360. National emergency. Grounds of declaration. Under Article 352, the President can declare a national emergency when the security of India or a part of it is threatened by war or external aggression or armed rebellion. It may be noted that the President can declare a national emergency even before the actual occurrence of war or external aggression or armed rebellion if he is satisfied that there is an imminent danger. The President can also issue different proclamations on grounds of war, external aggression, armed rebellion, or imminent danger thereof, whether or not there is a proclamation already issued by him and such proclamation is in operation. This provision was added by the 38th Amendment Act of 1975. When a national emergency is declared on the ground of war or external aggression, it is known as external emergency. On the other hand, when it is declared on the ground of armed rebellion, it is known as internal emergency. A proclamation of national emergency may be applicable to the entire country or only a part of it. The 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 enabled the President to limit the operation of a national emergency to a specified part of India. Originally, the Constitution mentioned internal disturbances as the third ground for the proclamation of a national emergency, but the expression was too vague and had a wider connotation. Hence, the 44th Amendment Act of 1978 substituted the word armed rebellion for internal disturbance. Thus, it is no longer possible to declare a national emergency on the ground of internal disturbance, as was done in 1975 by the Congress government headed by Indira Gandhi. The President, however, can proclaim a national emergency only after receiving a written recommendation from the Cabinet. This means that the emergency can be declared only on the concurrence of the Cabinet and not merely on the advice of the Prime Minister. In 1975, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi advised the President to proclaim emergency without consulting her Cabinet. The Cabinet was informed of the proclamation after it was made as a fait accompli. The 44th Amendment Act of 1978 introduced this safeguard to eliminate any possibility of the Prime Minister alone taking a decision in this regard. The 38th Amendment Act of 1975 made the declaration of a national emergency immune from the judicial review, but this provision was subsequently deleted by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Further, in the Minerva Mills case of 1980, the Supreme Court held that the proclamation of a national emergency can be challenged in a court on the ground of malafide or that the declaration was based on wholly extraneous and irrelevant fact or is absurd or perverse. Parliamentary approval and duration. The proclamation of emergency must be approved by both the House of Parliament within 1 month from the date of its issue. Originally, the period allowed for approval by the Parliament was 2 months but was reduced by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. However, if the proclamation of emergency is issued at a time when the Lok Sabha has been dissolved or the dissolution of the Lok Sabha takes place during the period of 1 month without approving the proclamation, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of the Lok Sabha after its reconstitution, provided the Rajya Sabha has in the meantime approved it. If approved by both the Houses of Parliament, the emergency continues for 6 months and can be extended to an indefinite period with an approval of the Parliament for every 6 months. This provision for periodical parliamentary approval was also added by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Before that, the emergency, once approved by the Parliament, could remain in operation as long as the Executive Cabinet desired. However, if the dissolution of Lok Sabha takes place during the period of 6 months without approving the further continuance of emergency, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of the Lok Sabha after its reconstitution, provided the Rajya Sabha has in the meantime approved its continuation. Every resolution approving the proclamation of emergency or its continuance must be passed by either House of Parliament by a special majority, that is, a majority of the total membership of that House and a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of that House present and voting. This special majority provision was introduced by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Previously, such resolution could be passed by a simple majority of the Parliament. Revocation of proclamation. A proclamation of emergency may be revoked by the President at any time by a subsequent proclamation. Such a proclamation does not require the parliamentary approval. Further, the President must revoke a proclamation if the Lok Sabha passes a resolution disapproving its continuation. Again, this safeguard was introduced by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Before the amendment, a proclamation could be revoked by the President on his own, and the Lok Sabha had no control in this regard. The 44th Amendment Act of 1978 also provided that where one-tenth of the total number of members of Lok Sabha give a written notice to the Speaker or to the President if the House is not in session, a special sitting of the House should be held within 14 days for the purpose of considering a resolution disapproving the continuation of the proclamation. A resolution of disapproval is different from a resolution approving the continuation of a proclamation in the following two respects. Number one, the first one is required to be passed by the Lok Sabha only, while the second one needs to be passed by both the houses of parliament. Number two, the first one is to be adopted by a simple majority only, while the second one needs to be adopted by a special majority. Effects of national emergency. A proclamation of emergency has drastic and wide-ranging effect on the political system. These consequences can be grouped into three categories. Number one, effect on center-state relations. Number two, effect on life of Lok Sabha and State Assembly. Number three, effect on fundamental rights. Effect on the center-state relations. While a proclamation of emergency is in force, the normal fabric of the center-state relations undergoes a basic change. This can be studied under three heads, namely executive, legislative, and financial. Executive. During a national emergency, the executive power of the center extends to directing any state regarding the manner in which its executive power is to be exercised. In normal times, the center can give executive directions to a state only on certain specified matters. However, during a national emergency, the center becomes entitled to give executive directions to a state on any matter. Thus, the central governments are brought under the complete control of the center, though they are not suspended. Legislative. During a national emergency, the parliament become empowered to make laws on any subject mentioned in the state list, although the legislative power of a state legislature is not suspended. It becomes subject to the overriding power of the parliament. Thus, the normal distribution of the legislative powers between the centre and the state is suspended, though the state legislatures are not suspended. In brief, the constitution becomes unitary rather than federal. The laws made by Parliament on the state subjects during a national emergency become inoperative 6 months after the emergency has ceased to operate. Notably, while a proclamation of national emergency is in operation, the President can issue ordinances on the state subject also if the Parliament is not in session. Further, the Parliament can confer powers and impose duties upon the centre or its officers and authorities in respect of matters outside the Union list in order to carry out the laws made by it under its extended jurisdiction as a result of the proclamation of a national emergency. The 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 provided that the two consequences mentioned above, executive and legislative, extends not only to a state where the emergency is in operation but also to any other state. Financial. While a proclamation of national emergency is in operation, the President can modify the constitutional distribution of revenues between the centre and the state. This means that the President can either reduce or cancel the transfer of finances from centre to the state. Such modification continues till the end of the financial year in which the emergency ceases to operate. Also, every such order of the President has to be laid before both the houses of Parliament. Effect on the life of Lok Sabha and State Assembly. While a proclamation of national emergency is in operation, the life of Lok Sabha may be extended beyond its normal term 5 years by a law of Parliament for 1 year at a time for any length of time. However, this extension cannot continue beyond a period of 6 months after the emergency has ceased to operate. For example, the term of 5th Lok Sabha 1971 to 77 was extended 2 times by 1 year at a time. Similarly, the Parliament may extend the normal tenure of a state legislative assembly 5 years by 1 year each time for any length of time during a national emergency, subject to a maximum period of 6 months after the emergency has ceased to operate. Effect on the fundamental rights. Article 358 and 359 describes the effect of a national emergency on the fundamental rights. Article 358 deals with the suspension of the fundamental rights guaranteed by Article 19. while Article 359 deals with the suspension of other fundamental rights except those guaranteed by Article 20 and 21. These two provisions are explained below. Suspension of fundamental right under Article 19. According to Article 358, when a proclamation of national emergency is made, the 6 fundamental rights under Article 19 are automatically suspended. No separate order for their suspension is required. While a proclamation of national emergency is in operation, the state is freed from the restrictions imposed by Article 19. In other words, the state can make any law or can take any executive action abridging or taking away the 6 fundamental rights guaranteed by Article 19. Any such law or executive action cannot be challenged on the ground that they are inconsistent with the 6 fundamental rights guaranteed by Article 19. When the national emergency ceases to operate, Article 19 automatically revives and comes into force. Any law made during emergency to the extent of inconsistency with Article 19 ceases to have effect. However, no remedy lies for anything done during the emergency even after the emergency expires. This means that the legislative and executive action taken during the emergency cannot be challenged even after the emergency ceases to operate. The 44th Amendment Act of 1978 restricted the scope of Article 358 in two ways. Firstly, the 6 fundamental rights under Article 19 can be suspended only when the national emergency is declared on the ground of war or external aggression and not on the ground of armed rebellion. Secondly, only those laws which are related with the emergency are protected from being challenged and not other laws. Also, the executive action taken only under such a law is protected. Suspension of other fundamental rights. Article 359 authorizes the President to suspend the right to move any court for the enforcement of fundamental rights during a national emergency. This means that under Article 359, the fundamental rights as such are not suspended but only their enforcement. The said rights are theoretically alive but the right to seek remedy is suspended. The suspension of enforcement relates to only those fundamental rights that are specified in the presidential order. Further, the suspension could be for the period during the operation of emergency or for a shorter period as mentioned in the order, and the suspension order may extend to the whole or any part of the country. It should be laid before each House of Parliament for approval. While a presidential order is in force, the state can make any law or can take any executive action abridging or taking away the specified fundamental rights. Any such law or executive action cannot be challenged on the ground that they are inconsistent with the specified fundamental right. When the order ceases to operate, any law so made to the extent of inconsistency with the specified fundamental right ceases to have effect, but no remedy lies for anything done during the operation of the order even after the order ceases to operate. This means that legislative and executive actions taken during the operation of the order cannot be challenged even after the order expires. The 44th Amendment Act of 1978 restricted the scope of Article 359 in two ways. Firstly, the President cannot suspend the right to move the court for the enforcement of fundamental right guaranteed by Article 20 and 21. In other words, the right to protection in respect of conviction for offences under Article 20 and the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 remain enforceable even during emergency. Secondly, only those laws which are related with the emergency are protected from being challenged and not other laws, and the executive action taken only under such a law is protected. Distinction between Article 358 and 359. The differences between Article 358 and 359 can be summarized as follows. Number 1. Article 358 is confined to fundamental right under Article 19 only, whereas Article 359 extends to all those fundamental rights whose enforcement is suspended by the presidential order. Number 2. Article 358 automatically suspends the fundamental rights under Article 19 as soon as the emergency is declared. On the other hand, Article 359 does not automatically suspend any fundamental right. It only empowers the President to suspend the enforcement of the specified fundamental right. Number 3. Article 358 operates only in case of external emergency, that is, when the emergency is declared on the grounds of war or external aggression, and not in the case of internal emergency, that is, when the emergency is declared on the ground of armed rebellion. Article 359, on the other hand, operates in case of both external emergency as well as internal emergency. Number 4. Article 358 suspends fundamental right under Article 19 for the entire duration of emergency, while Article 359 suspends the enforcement of fundamental rights for a period specified by the President, which may either be the entire duration of emergency or a shorter period. Number 5. Article 358 extends to the entire country, whereas Article 359 may extend to the entire country or a part of it. Number 6. Article 358 suspends Article 19 completely, while Article 359 does not empower the suspension of the enforcement of Article 20 and 21. Number 7. Article 358 enables the state to make any law or take any executive action inconsistent with fundamental right under Article 19, while Article 359 enables the state to make any law or take any executive action inconsistent with those fundamental rights whose enforcement is suspended by the presidential order. There is also a similarity between Article 358 and Article 359. Both provide immunity from challenging to only those laws which are related with the emergency and not other laws. Also, the executive action taken only under such a law is protected by both. Declaration made so far. This type of emergency has been proclaimed 3 times so far in 1962, 71 and 1975. The first proclamation of national emergency was issued in October 1962 on account of Chinese aggression in the Northeast Frontier Agency, now Arunachal Pradesh, and was in force till January 1968. Hence, a fresh proclamation was not needed at the time of war against Pakistan in 1965. The second proclamation of national emergency was made in December 1971 in the wake of attack by Pakistan. Even when this emergency was in operation, a third proclamation of national emergency was made in June 1975. Both the second and third proclamations were revoked in March 1977. The first 2 proclamations, 1962 to 71, were made on the ground of external aggression, while the third proclamation, 1975, was made on the ground of internal disturbance, that is, certain persons have been inciting the police and the armed force against the discharge of their duties and their normal functioning. The emergency declared in 1975, internal emergency, proved to be the most controversial. There was widespread criticism of the misuse of emergency powers. In the elections held to the Lok Sabha in 1977, after the emergency, the Congress party led by Indira Gandhi lost the Janata Party come to power. This government appointed the Shah Commission to investigate the circumstances that warranted the declaration of an emergency in 1975. The commission did not justify the declaration of the emergency. Hence, the 44th Amendment Act was enacted in 1978 to introduce a number of safeguards against the misuse of emergency provisions. President's Rule. Grounds of imposition. Article 355 imposes a duty on the centre to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. It is this duty, in the performance of which the centre takes over the government of a state under Article 356 in case of failure of constitutional machinery in a state. This is popularly known as President's Rule. It is also known as State Emergency or Constitutional Emergency. The President's Rule can be proclaimed under Article 356 on 2 grounds, one mentioned in Article 356 itself and another in Article 365. Number 1. Article 356 empowers the President to issue a proclamation if he is satisfied that a situation has arisen in which the government of a state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Notably, the President can act either on a report of the Governor of the state or otherwise too, that is, even without the Governor's report. Number 2. Article 365 says that whenever a state fails to comply with or to give effect to any direction from the centre, it will be lawful for the President to hold that a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. Parliamentary approval and duration. A proclamation imposing President's Rule must be approved by both the Houses of Parliament within 2 months from the date of its issue. However, if the proclamation of the President's rule is issued at a time when the Lok Sabha has been dissolved or dissolution of Lok Sabha takes place during the period of 2 months without approving the proclamation, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of Lok Sabha after its reconstitution, provided the Rajya Sabha approves it in the meantime. If approved by both the Houses of Parliament, the President's rule continues for 6 months. It can be extended for a maximum period of 3 years with the approval of Parliament every 6 months. However, if the dissolution of Lok Sabha takes place during the period of 6 months without approving the further continuation of the President's rule, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of Lok Sabha after its reconstitution, provided the Rajya Sabha has in the meantime approved its continuance. Every resolution approving the proclamation of President's rule or its continuation can be passed by either House of Parliament only by a simple majority, that is, a majority of the members of that House present and voting. The 44th Amendment Act of 1978 introduced a new provision to put restraint on the power of Parliament to extend a proclamation of President's rule beyond 1 year. Thus, it provided that beyond 1 year, the President's rule can be extended by 6 months at a time only when the following two conditions are fulfilled. Number 1, a proclamation of national emergency should be in operation in the whole of India or in the whole or any part of the state. Number 2, the Election Commission must certify that the general elections to the Legislative Assembly of the concerned state cannot be held on account of difficulties. A proclamation of President's rule may be revoked by the President at any time by a subsequent proclamation. Such a proclamation does not require the parliamentary approval. Consequences of President's rule. The President acquires the following extraordinary powers when the President's rule is imposed in a state. Number 1, he can take up the functions of the state government and powers vested in the governor or any other executive authority in the state. Number 2, he can declare that the powers of the state legislature are to be exercised by the parliament. Number 3, he can take all other necessary steps, including the suspension of the constitutional provisions relating to any body or authority in the state. Therefore, when the President's rule is imposed in a state, the President dismisses the State Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister. The State Governor, on behalf of the President, carries on the state administration with the help of the Chief Secretary of the state or the advisors appointed by the President. This is the reason why a proclamation under Article 356 is popularly known as the imposition of President's rule in a state. Further, the President either suspends or dissolves the State Legislative Assembly. The Parliament passes the state legislative bills and the state budget. When the state legislature is thus suspended or dissolved, the Parliament can delegate the power to make laws for the state to the President or to any other authority specified by him in this regard. Number 2, the Parliament or in case of delegation, the President or any other specified authority can make laws conferring powers and imposing duties on the centre or its officers and authorities. Number 3, the President can authorize, when the Lok Sabha is not in session, expenditure from the state consolidated fund pending its sanction by the Parliament. Number 4, the President can promulgate, when the Parliament is not in session, ordinances for the governance of the state. A law made by the Parliament or President or any other specified authority continues to be operative even after the President's rule. This means that the period for which such a law remains in force is not coterminous with the duration of the proclamation, but it can be repealed or altered or re-enacted by the state legislature. It should be noted here that the President cannot assume to himself the powers vested in the concerned state high court or suspend the provisions of the constitution relating to it. In other words, the constitutional positions, status, powers and functions of the concerned state high court remain same even during the President's rule. Use of Article 356. Since 1950, the President's rule has been imposed on more than 125 occasions, that is, on an average twice a year. Further, on a number of occasions, the President's rule has been imposed in an arbitrary manner for political or personal reasons. Hence, Article 356 has become one of the most controversial and most criticized provisions of the Constitution. Comparing national emergency and President's rule. Number 1. National emergency can be proclaimed only when the security of India or a part of it is threatened by war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. While President's rule can be proclaimed when the government of a state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution due to reasons which may not have any connection with war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. Number 2. National emergency. During its operation, the state executive and legislature continue to function and exercise the powers assigned to them under the Constitution. Its effect is that the center gets concurrent powers of administration and legislation in the state, while the president's rule during its operation, the state executive is dismissed and the state legislature is either suspended or dissolved. The president administers the state through the governor and the parliament makes laws for the state. In brief, the executive and legislative powers of the state are assumed by the center. Number 3. Under national emergency, the parliament can make laws on the subjects enumerated in the state list only by itself. That is, it cannot delegate the same to any other body or authority. While in President's rule, the Parliament can delegate the power to make laws for the state to the President or to any other authority specified by him. So far, the practice has been for the President to make laws for the state in consultation with the members of Parliament from that state. Such laws are known as President Act. Number 4. National emergency. There is no maximum period prescribed for its operation. It can be continued indefinitely with the approval of Parliament for every 6 months, while in President's rule, there is a maximum period prescribed for its operation, that is 3 years. Thereafter, it must come to an end and the normal constitutional machinery must be restored in the state. Number 5. Under national emergency, the relationship of the center with all the state undergoes a modification, while in the President's rule, the relationship of only the state under emergency with the center undergoes a modification. Number 6. Under national emergency, every resolution of Parliament approving its proclamation or its continuance must be passed by a special majority, while in President's rule, every resolution of Parliament approving its proclamation or its continuance can be passed only by a simple majority. Number 7. Under national emergency, it affects the fundamental right of the citizens, while President's rule has no effect on fundamental right of the citizens. Number 8. National emergency, Lok Sabha can pass a resolution for its revocation, while in President's rule, there is no such provision. It can be revoked by the President only on his own. For the first time, the President's rule was imposed in Punjab in 1951. By now, almost all of the states have been brought under the President's rule once or twice or more. The details in this regard are given in following table. When general elections were held to the Lok Sabha in 1977, after the internal emergency, the ruling Congress party lost, the Janata Party came to power. The new government headed by Morarji Desai imposed President's rule in 9 states where the Congress party was in power, on the ground that the assemblies in those states no longer represented the wishes of the electorate. When the Congress party returned to power in 1980, it did the same in 9 states on the same ground. In 1992, President's rule was imposed in 3 BJP-ruled states, that is Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan, by the Congress party on the ground that they were not implementing sincerely the ban imposed by the centre on the religious organizations. In a landmark judgment in Bombay case 1994, the Supreme Court upheld the validity of his proclamation on the ground that secularism is a basic feature of the Constitution. But the court did not uphold the validity of imposition of the President's rule in Nagaland in 1980, Karnataka in 1989 and Meghalaya in 1991. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, while replying to the critics of this provision in the Constituent Assembly, hoped that the drastic power conferred by Article 356 would remain a dead letter and would be used only as a measure of last resort. He observed, the intervention of the centre must be deemed to be barred because that would be an invasion on the sovereign authority of the province state. That is a fundamental proposition which we must accept by reason of the fact that we have federal constitution, that Being so, if the center is to interfere in the administration of provincial affairs, it must be under some obligation which the constitution imposes upon the center. The proper thing we ought to expect is that such articles will never be called into operation and that they would remain a dead letter. If at all they are brought into operation, I hope the president who is endowed with this power will take proper precautions before actually suspending the administration of the province. However, the subsequent events show that what was hoped to be a dead letter of the constitution has turned to be a deadly weapon against a number of state governments and legislative assemblies. In this context, H.V. Kamath, a member of the Constituent Assembly, commented a decade ago, Dr. Ambedkar is dead and the articles are very much alive. Scope of judicial review. The 38th Amendment Act of 1975 made the satisfaction of the President in invoking Article 356 final and conclusive, which could not be challenged in any court on any ground. But this provision was subsequently deleted by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978, implying that the satisfaction of the President is not beyond judicial review. In Bommai case 1994, the following propositions have been laid down by the Supreme Court on imposition of President's rule in a state under Article 356. Number 1. The presidential proclamation imposing President's rule is subject to judicial review. Number 2. The satisfaction of the President must be based on relevant material. The action of the President can be struck down by the court if it is based on irrelevant or extraneous grounds or if it was found to be malified or perverse. Number 3. Burden lies on the center to prove that relevant material exists to justify the imposition of the President's rule. Number 4. The court cannot go into the correctness of the material or its adequacy, but it can see whether it is relevant to the action. Number 5. If the court holds the presidential proclamation to be unconstitutional and invalid, it has power to restore the dismissed state government and revive the state legislative assembly if it was suspended or dissolved. Number 6. The state legislative assembly should be dissolved only after the parliament has approved the presidential proclamation. Until such approval is given, the president can only suspend the assembly. In case the parliament fails to approve the proclamation, the assembly would get reactivated. Number 7. Secularism is one of the basic features of constitution. Hence, a state government pursuing anti-secular politics is liable to action under Article 356. Number 8. The question of the state government losing the confidence of the legislative assembly should be decided on the floor of the house, and until that is done, the ministry should not be unseated. Number 9. Where a new political party assumes power at the center, it will not have the authority to dismiss ministries formed by other parties in the state. Number 10. The power under Article 356 is an exceptional power and should be used only occasionally to meet the requirements of special situations. Cases of proper and improper use. Based on the report of Sarkaria Commission on the Center-State Relations 1988, the Supreme Court in Bommai case 1994 enlisted the situation where the exercise of power under Article 356 could be proper or improper. Imposition of President's rule in a state would be proper in the following situations. Number 1. Where after general elections to the assembly, no party secures a majority, that is hung assembly. Number 2. Where the party having a majority in the assembly declines to form a ministry and the governor cannot find a coalition ministry commanding a majority in the assembly. Number 3. Where a ministry resigns after its defeat in the assembly and no other party is willing or able to form a ministry commanding a majority in the assembly. Number 4. Where a constitutional direction of the central government is disregarded by the state government. Number 5. Internal subversion, where, for example, a government is deliberately acting against the constitution and the law or is fomenting a violent revolt. Number 6. Physical breakdown, where the government willfully refuses to discharge its constitutional obligations, endangering the security of the state. The imposition of President's rule in a state would be improper under the following situations. Number 1. Where a ministry resigns or is dismissed on losing majority support in the assembly and the governor recommends imposition of President's rule without proving the possibility of forming an alternative ministry. Number 2. Where the governor makes his own assessment of the support of a ministry in the assembly and recommends imposition of President's rule without allowing the ministry to prove its majority on the floor of the assembly. Number 3. where the ruling party enjoying majority support in the assembly has suffered a massive defeat in the general elections to the Lok Sabha, such as in 1977 and 1980. Number 4. Internal disturbances not amounting to internal subversion or physical breakdown. Number 5. Maladministration in the state or allegations of corruption against the minister stringent financial exigencies of the state. Number 6. Where the state government is not given prior warning to rectify itself except in case of extreme urgency leading to disastrous consequences. Number 7. Where the power is used to sort out intra-party problems of the ruling party or for a purpose of extraneous or irrelevant to the one for which it has been conferred by the Constitution. Financial emergency. Grounds of declaration. Article 360 empowers the President to proclaim a financial emergency if he is satisfied that a situation has arisen due to which the financial stability or credit of India or any part of his territory is threatened. The 38th Amendment Act of 1975 made the satisfaction of the President in declaring a financial emergency final and conclusive and not questionable in any court on any ground. But this provision was subsequently deleted by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978, implying that the satisfaction of the President is not beyond judicial review. Parliamentary approval and duration. A proclamation declaring financial emergency must be approved by both the Houses of Parliament within 2 months from the date of its issue. However, if the proclamation of financial emergency is issued at a time when the Lok Sabha has been dissolved or the dissolution of Lok Sabha takes place during the period of 2 months without approving the proclamation, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of Lok Sabha after its reconstitution, provided the Rajya Sabha has in the meantime approved it. Once approved by both the Houses of Parliament, the financial emergency continues indefinitely till it is revoked. This implies two things. Number 1, there is no maximum period prescribed for its operation. Number 2, repeated parliamentary approval is not required for its continuation. A resolution approving the proclamation of financial emergency can be passed by either House of Parliament only by a simple majority, that is, a majority of the members of that House present and voting. A proclamation of financial emergency may be revoked by the President at any time by a subsequent proclamation. Such a proclamation does not require the parliamentary approval. Effect of financial emergency. The consequences of the proclamation of financial emergency are as follows. Number 1. The executive authority of the centre extends to the giving of directions to any state to observe such canons of financial propriety as may be specified in the directions and such other directions to any state as the President may deem necessary and adequate for the purpose. Number 2. Any such direction may include a provision requiring the reduction of salaries and allowances of all or any class of persons serving in the state and the reservation of all money bills or other financial bills for the consideration of the President after they are passed by the legislature of the state. Number 3. The President may issue directions for the reduction of salaries and allowances of all or any class of persons serving the Union and the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court. Thus, during the operation of a financial emergency, the centre acquires full control over the state in financial matters. H.N. Kunjru, a member of the Constituent Assembly, stated that the financial emergency provisions pose a serious threat to the financial autonomy of the state. Explaining the reasons for their inclusion in the Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar observed in the Constituent Assembly, this article more or less follows the pattern of what is called the National Recovery Act of the United States passed in 1933, which gave the President power to make similar provisions in order to remove the difficulties, both economical and financial, that had overtaken the American people as a result of the Great Depression. No financial emergency has been declared so far, though there was a financial crisis in 1991. Criticism of the emergency provisions. Some members of the Constituent Assembly criticized the incorporation of emergency provisions in the Constitution on the following grounds. Number 1. The federal character of the Constitution will be destroyed and the Union will become all-powerful. Number 2. The power of the state, both the Union and the units, will entirely be concentrated in the hands of the Union executive. Number 3. The President will become a dictator. Number 4. The financial autonomy of the state will be nullified. Number 5. fundamental rights will become meaningless, and as a result, the democratic foundations of the constitutions will be destroyed. Thus, H.V. Kamath observed, I fear that by this single chapter we are seeking to lay the foundation of a totalitarian state, a police state, a state completely opposed to all the ideals and principles that we have held aloft during the last few decades, a state where the rights and liberties of millions of innocent men and women will be in continuous jeopardy, a state where, if there be peace, it will be the peace of the grave and void of the desert. It will be a day of shame and sorrow when the President makes use of these powers having no parallel in any constitution of the democratic countries of the world. K.T. Shah described them as a chapter of reaction and retrogression. I find one cannot but notice two distinct currents of thought underlying and influencing throughout the provisions of this chapter: to arm the center with special powers against the unit, to arm the government against the people. Looking at all the provisions of this chapter, particularly and scrutinizing the powers that have been given in almost every article, it seems to me the name only of liberty or democracy will remain under the Constitution. T.T. Krishnamachari feared that by means of these provisions, the President and the Executive would be exercising a form of constitutional dictatorship. H.N. Kunjuru opined that the emergency financial provisions pose a serious threat to the financial autonomy of the state. However, there were also protagonists of the emergency provisions in the Constituent Assembly. Thus, Sir Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer levelled them as the very breath of the Constitution. Mahabir Tyagi opined that they would work as a safety valve and thereby help in the maintenance of the Constitution. While defending the emergency provisions in the Constitution, a Constituent Assembly, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also accepted the possibility of their misuse. He observed, I do not altogether deny that there is a possibility of the articles being abused or employed for political purpose. The theoretical portion of this chapter ended here. For further tables, you can refer to the book or PDF. Thank you.